Daenerys Targaryen stood on the polished steps of the Grand Plaza, her silver hair lifted by a breeze saturated with heat and incense. Though she had emerged from countless trials and triumphs, Slaver's Bay, the war in Westeros, the forging of alliances and the blazing of battles, nothing compared to the sense of tremor in the air at this moment. Hundreds of voices chanted, a low and reverent mantra that trembled along the marble walls as if the stone itself took part in the devotions. Though she had been heralded by many titles, Breaker of Chains, Mother of Dragons, the Unburnt, today she was something else. She could feel it in the fervor of the crowd, see it in the shapes of flames dancing in the braziers around the plaza. The Red Priests had come together to bestow upon her a new title, a new name, a living goddess of fire. Drogon coiled behind her like a shifting mountain of black scales, each plate edged with streaks of red that glinted in the sunlight. He had grown immense in recent years, a creature out of fable, his wingspan so broad that a single sweep could cast an entire city avenue in shadow. And despite all Daenerys had seen and endured, she herself stood in awe of him now. He was, without question, the largest dragon the world had known since Balerion the Black Dread. Yet the murmurs had become unshakable. Some claimed he had already surpassed Balerion in size, that his bones and sinews still pulsed with growth. More astonishing still were the whispered proclamations that fire, whether from enemy scorpions or the burning pitch of siege weapons, could not harm him. He was, some said, truly invulnerable. If Daenerys were to be the living goddess of flame, then Drogon would be her invincible right hand. She felt a curious mixture of exhilaration and worry. Each step down the white marble stairs seemed to resonate within her. In the distance, the Red Temple's crimson-robed priests parted. Kinvara, a high priestess, wore a mask of serene confidence. Flames reflected off her jewelry, golden shapes flickering with every sway of her robes. Her voice poured out in an authoritative hush that carried the weight of prophecy. "You have walked through fire and returned unscathed," she declared. "You command the greatest living flame the world has known. The Lord of Light has shown us that you are the mortal vessel of his brightness." Daenerys Stormborn, the flame made flesh. A thunder of chanting spread across the plaza. Some in the crowd knelt, pressing their foreheads to the ground, while others reached toward her with tears in their eyes. The air smelled of smoke and resin, pungent and intoxicating, as if the barrier between the mortal and the divine had thinned into a shimmering veil. It was then that Daenerys realized how thoroughly she had been woven into their prophecies. No longer was she a queen or conqueror alone. They wanted her to be a goddess incarnate, a living symbol of redemption and wrath in one. She looked over her shoulder at Drogon, who loomed behind her like a fortress of scales, proud and silent. He rumbled once, an acknowledgement of the crowd's adoration, or perhaps a warning that they not come too close. She felt the heat of his body, a gentle wave that warmed her despite the desert sun. In her heart, she recalled a time when he was a hatchling small enough to curl on her shoulder. Now there was talk of him being bigger than Balerion the Black Dread, Aegon the Conqueror's mightiest beast, whose skull had graced the bowels of the Red Keep for centuries. She remembered seeing that skull, the deep hollows of its eye sockets like black portals. The idea that Drogon had already exceeded that fearsome legend was enough to take her breath away. She drew in a steady breath, summoning her composure. She had faced armies and the undead had challenged the entire might of Westeros. Now she faced the trembling faith of a people who believed her divine. "Rise," she commanded softly. "You do not need to prostrate yourselves before me." But they did not listen. The chanting continued, "Azor Ahai! Azor Ahai! Azor Ahai!" The name filled the air, riding on the incense-laden smoke, twisting around every stone pillar and archway. But this time, they did not merely call her Azor Ahai Reborn. The words changed, subtly at first, until they morphed into an invocation. She is flame. She is goddess. She is flame. She is goddess. Within Daenerys, a flicker of uncertainty stirred. While the adoration buoyed her, she sensed the sheer weight of expectation pressing inward. The Red Priests had chosen her, or their Lord of Light had shown her to them. She could almost feel the ropes of prophecy entwining around her limbs, binding her to a fate yet unwritten. On the fringes of the crowd, beyond the incense and the prayers, some eyes glowed with fervent madness. Others simply looked frightened. She could not blame them. Worship could all too quickly turn to fanaticism. Kinvara advanced, the hems of her robes brushing the marble, arms lifted in a gesture of invocation. "Your blood is fire," she intoned, voice echoing like a clarion in the hush. "Your heart is a furnace. The flames never consumed you because you were their mistress. The world has been shrouded in darkness, and only you can reignite the dawn. Command us, living goddess, and we shall obey. Lead us to cleanse the shadow from every land." A hush fell, broken only by the snapping and crackling of the braziers. Daenerys raised her chin, feeling the dryness in her throat. She wanted to speak with authority, but something in her chest fluttered. Was she truly destined to be a goddess among mortals? She had never believed in such claims, not fully, though she had walked from fire with eggs that hatched into dragons. The swirling haze of memory, of Kartha's warlocks, of the House of the Undying, of the moment she first rode Drogon into the sky, clashed with her practical experiences. She was mortal, flesh and blood, prone to mistakes, capable of doubt. But there was no denying that something extraordinary lived within her, bound to fire and heat. And every day Drogon reaffirmed that bond, his growth almost unnatural, unstoppable, as though he fed on her unwavering will. She stepped forward, raising her voice, trying to strike a balance between commanding presence and humility. "I am Daenerys Targaryen," she said, "and if I hold the flame of the Lord of Light, then I vow to use it justly. I do not seek blind worship, but I cannot deny what the signs have shown. Follow me if you will. Together we shall leave no room for the darkness of tyrants and slavers." A roar rose up from the assemblage, ecstatic and fervent. Priests of Lawlor brandished torches, letting the flames lick at the sky in unison. The worshippers mirrored the gesture, arms outstretched. On the edges of the plaza, Daenerys saw a scattering of Westerosi knights who had come to witness the spectacle. Some looked bewildered, others uneasy. Only Grey Worm, stoic and silent, betrayed nothing as he guarded Daenerys' flank. Tyrion Lannister, however, stood at a distance, arms folded, brow furrowed in open dismay at the turn of events. When the ceremony concluded, Daenerys turned and with a gentle inclination of her head willed Drogon to spread his wings. The beast let out a deep rumble that resonated in the chest of every onlooker like distant thunder. People gasped and fell back as the enormous dragon took flight, stirring the desert dust in great swirling clouds. Daenerys climbed upon his back with a practiced ease, ignoring the lances of raw wind that whipped against her face. He carried her above the temples and the chanting throngs below into the open sky, each mighty flap reverberating with the power to shape entire kingdoms. High above the city walls, the horizon stretched golden brown under the scorching sun. Drogon soared over the coast and out to sea, cresting the rolling dunes before returning to circle the red temple's highest spire. Below, the people continued their chanting, lost in rapture. That evening, Daenerys summoned her closest advisors to a secluded courtyard in the temple complex. The walls were draped with crimson silks, the braziers filled with fragrant wood that popped and flared. Torchlight shimmered off polished tiles inlaid with swirling motifs of flames. She sat at a low table, eyes scanning the faces of those she trusted. Tyrion was the first to speak. "I'm not entirely comfortable," he began, "with you being declared a goddess of fire. One can only guess how swiftly that can turn sour, especially when dealing with zealots who may interpret your every move in extremes." Daenerys inclined her head, acknowledging his concern. "Nor am I entirely comfortable with it, Tyrion. Yet it's undeniable how firmly their faith is placed in me. And they aren't alone. Across Essos, I have supporters who see my victory over the great masters and my birth from the flames as miracles." Grey Worm remained silent, his face betraying no opinion. Ser Davos, now a close advisor in the wake of so many shifting alliances, cleared his throat. "Your grace, or should I say, your divinity?" He gave a lopsided grin that died quickly when Daenerys' expression did not change. "I've seen men follow gods and break their own laws in their name. I've also seen men renounce old ways and embrace new ones under the slightest nudge from priests. A crowned queen I can understand. A goddess. That might inspire worship, yes, but also madness." Daenerys pressed her lips together, letting her gaze wander to the flicker of the torches. She could not deny the thrill that coursed through her when the red priests declared her the living goddess of fire. There was a fearful power in the unyielding devotion in their eyes. "The question is," she said softly, "do I embrace their adoration or push it away? What if my acceptance can help unify the continent under a single vision? What if it can prevent future conflicts by giving people something to believe in beyond petty politics?" Ser Jorah, leaning on his sword, ventured quietly, "Your compassion and your justice have always been your greatest strengths. If you allow this mantle to isolate you from the people you serve, if you become something too high for them to reach, you might lose that compassion. But if you remain a queen first who just so happens to be revered, then perhaps you can guide them to peace. Tread carefully, Khaleesi. She noticed his old habit of calling her Khaleesi had crept back in, a reminder of simpler days. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I will be careful. She raised a cup of spiced wine to her lips, savoring the heady aromas of cinnamon and cardamom. And I will need all your counsel. The more power we gain, whether through crowns or prophecy, the more precarious our position becomes. That night, she walked alone through the temple's corridors, illuminated by flickering candlelight. The statues of Lawler seemed to watch her with hollow eyes of onyx. In a courtyard that opened to the stars, she found Drogon curled in slumber. He filled nearly the entire space, wings draped like black satin that shimmered with faint red veins. She heard the slow rumble of his breathing, felt the heat radiate from his body. Softly, she placed a hand on his flank, feeling the warmth beneath the scales. Her mind flew back to those first nights in the wilderness near the Red Waste when he was only a babe made of claws and squeaking roars. Now, the thunder of his presence rattled the stones. Are you truly invincible? She whispered to him, half to herself. She remembered the wounds he had received in distant battles. Crossbow bolts and spear thrusts had once marred his hide. Yet over time it seemed no metal could pierce him, no fire could scorch him. The priest said he was the manifestation of her divine might, the unstoppable force to sweep aside any darkness. In her heart, she wondered what cost that unstoppable might demand. Morning arrived with a cloudless sky and a radiant sun that felt like a crucible. Daenerys ascended to the temple's highest balcony, from which she could see the city stretch out below in a mass of pale buildings and winding streets. Far off, the sea glimmered like polished steel. She expected to enjoy a moment of solitude, but found Kinvara waiting for her, a serene statue in crimson robes. I trust you slept well, your radiance, the priestess asked, the term of address sliding off her tongue with unadulterated reverence. I slept, Daenerys said, noticing how the woman's eyes gleamed with almost unnatural intensity. Kinvara inclined her head. Doubt weighs on your spirit. I sense it. You wonder if you are truly a goddess, or if we are simply shaping you to fit our visions. Daenerys exhaled, shifting her gaze to the horizon. You speak plainly, Kinvara. I appreciate that. Tell me, then, how sure are you of your lord's word? Even Stannis Baratheon was once proclaimed Azor a High Reborn. He was not immune to mortal failings, nor did he seem to bring about any great salvation. The priestess's lips curved into a thin smile. The Lord of Light grants us visions, but the pathways to fulfilling them can twist. Stannis was a shadow of what was promised. The flame showed the possibility, but he was not the final truth. He lacked compassion, lacked the warmth of mercy you possess. You have the fire, and the mercy both are needed to banish the great darkness. Daenerys felt a pang of grief whenever she was confronted by men who had tried to fulfill prophecy and failed, leaving only ashes in their wake. What do you see in my future? Kinvara stepped closer, her voice hushed. I see a cleansing flame roaring across the seas. I see a world reborn, free of old tyrannies and ancient curses. I see you, Daenerys of the Targaryen blood, standing in the heart of this new dawn. And I see shadows recoiling from your dragon's roar. Drogon is more than a beast, he is a living extension of your fire. The two of you are entwined. As you grow, so does he. As you embrace your destiny, so does he in ways none can fathom. A swirl of desert wind tugged at Daenerys' silver hair, blowing it across her shoulders. Then let us see if these visions bear fruit. She placed a hand on the balcony's edge, feeling the rough stone beneath her palm. I will not hide from what I may be, nor will I let it consume me. Before Kinvara could reply, a sudden roar filled the air, Drogon's roar, shaking the very foundations of the temple. Daenerys spun on her heel. The black silhouette of her dragon swept across the courtyard below, wings extended so far that with each downward beat, swirling clouds of dust rose from the ground. People scattered, some running in awe or terror, others dropping to their knees in worship. Drogon swooped lower, raking his claws across the top of the temple roof, then ascending again as if unsettled by something beyond Daenerys' sight. She raced down the stairs, heart pounding. By the time she reached the open courtyard, her advisors were already gathering. Tyrion's face was streaked with dust, his blonde hair in disarray as if he'd nearly been knocked over by Drogon's wings. He's restless, Tyrion said. Or something spooked him. Daenerys hurried into the open space. Drogon landed like a thunderclap. The stones cracked beneath his weight, and he released a savage roar that rattled the pillars. Servants and worshippers alike cowered. Daenerys approached him slowly, unafraid, her heart hammering. She could see an intelligence in his burning gaze, something he wished to convey. In the hush that followed, she pressed her hand against his enormous jaw. Heat radiated from him, but it did not burn her skin. She heard a distant flapping and felt the swirl of wind as Regal and Viserion, her other two dragons, circled above in a slow, watchful pattern. They were smaller compared to Drogon, though still formidable. But Drogon's size now dwarfed them, making them seem half-grown. She wondered if they would ever catch up. "What is it?" she murmured, though she knew Drogon could not form words. She sensed urgency in him. For a moment, she closed her eyes, listening to his breathing, feeling for the bond between them. A voice rang out from the courtyard's entrance. Yora, leaning slightly on his sword as he hurried in, spoke in a grave tone. "A messenger arrived from Volantis, your grace. He brings tidings of an army gathering near the old Valyrian roads. They claim it's a warlord or a band of mercenaries, but rumors say it might be a cult that worships only the darkest aspects of fire." Kinvara's face tightened. "They blaspheme the Lord of Light, perhaps. Or worship the shadow that thrives in Flame's absence. We must be vigilant." Daenerys felt Drogon shift under her hand, a coil of tension rippling along his spine. She imagined that even if this was a minor threat, his battle hunger had been stoked. A goddess or not, she was a ruler, and the lands she had liberated from slavery and tyranny must be defended. She stepped away from Drogon's jaw and looked at her advisors. "Summon our forces. If a threat stirs, we meet it before it reaches our walls." Tyrion coughed, clearing the dust from his throat. "You'll want to confirm their numbers, gather intelligence. I can see to the dispatch of scouts. If indeed they are a cult opposing the Red Temple, they might attempt to undermine you, especially with the fervor that surrounds your new status." Daenerys nodded. She felt the swirling tide of devotion behind her, like a wave that could just as easily crash over her if not guided properly. "Yes, do it. Yora, prepare the Unsullied and the Dothraki. We ride by morning." Within hours, the temple city was abuzz with activity. Red priests offered blessings to departing soldiers, anointing them with perfumed oils and chanting prayers to Lawler. Some of the freedmen and their families watched from corners and balconies, uncertain whether to celebrate or fear this mobilization of might. Dothraki riders sharpened their araks and tested the resilience of their horses under the desert sun. The Unsullied stood in neat formations, their discipline unwavering, their spears like a forest of lethal intent. Daenerys, decked in leather armor reinforced with greaves and pauldrons, strode through the ranks. She paused at the edge of a wide courtyard where droves of soldiers were preparing for the journey and found Missandei waiting. The young woman smiled gently. "It seems we march again, your grace." Daenerys extended a hand and Missandei clasped it. "We must. If there is any threat seeking to undermine the fragile peace we've built, I cannot ignore it. Especially not when the Red Priests are looking to me as a divine figure. If I were to do nothing, I'd lose the very credibility they've bestowed upon me." Missandei nodded, her eyes reflecting both admiration and concern. "Be cautious. The more they see you as a goddess, the more they will demand miracles. How will mortal tactics fare when the faithful expect fire and fury at a snap of your fingers?" "That is precisely my fear," Daenerys admitted. "But it's also an opportunity. Our enemies might underestimate mortal cunning if they believe I rely solely on divine power. Let them be blindsided by strategy." Her voice steadied, forging determination from uncertainty. "Still, I have Drogon." The plan was simple. Daenerys would lead a core contingent of the Unsullied and Dothraki along the ancient Valyrian road toward Volantis, while scouts swept ahead to confirm the nature of this emerging threat. Tyrion would remain behind to govern the city and continue negotiations with the Red Temple's hierarchy. If needed, Daenerys could send word for reinforcements. That night, the stars seemed to burn brighter than usual. Daenerys found respite in a secluded courtyard, the smell of jasmine drifting from hedges that lined the polished flagstones. In the center rose an ancient statue, its surface worn smooth by time, once depicting a forgotten deity. She found the irony comforting. This was a statue of a god who had lost worshippers to centuries of wind and sand, while she was now declared a living goddess before the world. She wondered if all gods eventually found themselves replaced or eroded, their altars left to ruin. Her thoughts spiraled, seeking clarity in the hush of the night. Could she be what the priests claimed, or was she merely the beneficiary of extraordinary circumstances? Her unwavering belief in her destiny, carried since childhood, had led her across seas and into the heart of battles. It had saved her from assassins and from her own worst impulses. Yet to be a goddess was another matter entirely. If the priests were right and her dragon was unassailable, was that gift truly from the Lord of Light or some deeper magic in the Targaryen bloodline? She turned her face skyward. The stars twinkled like shards of diamond across black velvet. In the distance, Drogon's massive shape soared across the moon, a silent silhouette of power. His flight comforted her. At least in him she found a constant, something she trusted more than any prophecy. He was her child, her companion, her shield. When dawn spread its first pale fingers across the sky, Daenerys led her forces out of the city. Drogon took flight overhead, casting shadows over the columns of soldiers. The Red Priests chanted blessings in their wake, their torches guttering in the early light. Off to the west, the horizon shimmered with heat mirages, giving the desert the deceptive appearance of an ocean. Their march was relentless for 3 days. They crossed dry expanses of cracked earth, camped by sparse oases under starry nights. The heat bore down on them by day, but the men and women in Daenerys' ranks were hardened, unsullied by their harsh training, Dothraki by the fierce nature of the steppe. Daenerys herself felt the sweat and grit, but bore it without complaint. She was no goddess to them now, she was a commander on the march, pushing through thirst and dust side by side with them. On the 4th day, one of her outriders galloped back, horse lathered in sweat. "Your Grace," he panted. "There's a gathering of armed men ahead, near the ruined outpost of Valasar. They carry banners marked with a black sun. And they have war machines. At least 1,000, maybe more." Daenerys exchanged looks with Yora, who rode at her side. The black sun was no sigil she recognized from Westeros. Likely some cultic symbol. "We'll approach with caution," she ordered. "I want to see if they'll parley." The outpost of Valasar was little more than a cluster of crumbling walls around a dilapidated keep, relics from the old Valyrian freehold. The surrounding terrain was littered with broken stones that jutted from the sand like skeletal remains. As Daenerys and her vanguard approached, they saw the enemy's camp in stark clarity. Tents in irregular rows, banners bearing the sigil of a black sun with trailing rays. Soldiers milled about, armed with curved swords and spears. A few were grouped around peculiar machines resembling massive crossbows mounted on wheels. Siege scorpions, perhaps. Daenerys reined in her stallion, scanning the ranks. Drogon circled overhead, his shadow rippling across the arid ground. The enemy, if they were unsettled by the sight of a giant dragon, did not immediately show it. One man separated from the ranks, riding forward. He wore black leathers scorched at the edges, as if deliberately singed for effect. The man halted a dozen paces away, raising an open palm. "I am Malagor," he declared, his voice echoing off the stone ruins. "High priest of the Shadow Sun, devotee of the black flame that scorches false idols. Who commands these armies?" Daenerys nudged her horse forward. "I am Daenerys Targaryen, queen of the 7 kingdoms, breaker of chains, and mother of dragons." She paused, letting the titles sink in. She could almost taste the dryness in the air, smell the tension in the wind. "What do you want here?" Malagor's eyes glinted with zealotry. "We have heard of you, Targaryen. Heard that you claim dominion over flame, that you let the Red Priests anoint you as living divinity. We have come to banish such heresy. Fire belongs to the darkness that devours, not to your pompous illusions of salvation. We will see which flame truly prevails." Daenerys narrowed her gaze. So it was a fanatic's war, waged in the name of a twisted creed. "We seek no quarrel with those who do not threaten innocent lives. If you step aside, you may yet leave in peace." Malagor's mouth twisted in a sneer. "It is too late for peace. Surrender your false titles and the abomination you ride, or be consumed." Drogon, sensing her rising anger, released a bellowing roar overhead. It set the war machines rattling, and at last, a ripple of fear passed among the opposing ranks. Malagor's horse pranced nervously, but the man kept his composure. "You see," he spat, "this is no normal beast and you no normal woman. You are a witch that must be destroyed." Daenerys felt her fists tighten around the reins, knuckles going white. "Then so be it." She turned her horse, trotting back to her lines. The words from her conversation with Tyrion and Yora echoed in her mind. "Be cautious. Do not let them corner you in a display of unbridled wrath." But she felt the heat rising inside her, a righteous fury that these zealots would claim ownership of fire while calling her a witch. Perhaps it was the power the Red Priests insisted she possessed, stirring within her blood like molten lava. They arrayed for battle. The Unsullied spread in tight phalanxes, spears raised, shields locked. The Dothraki took position on the flanks, mounted aurochs glinting in the sun. Daenerys rode forward until she was just behind the front ranks, while Drogon circled overhead, casting an ominous silhouette. One more roar thundered across the wasteland. The enemy responded by hauling their siege scorpions into position, pivoting them to aim skyward at the massive dragon. The hush that followed felt like the moment before a drumbeat of war. Then a harsh cry broke from the enemy lines, and the Black Sun banners lurched forward. Their infantry charged, brandishing wickedly curved blades. Their siege crews quickly adjusted, cranking the scorpions to track Drogon's flight. Daenerys, though uncertain whether to unleash fire, immediately realized she could not wait. "Unsullied, hold the line," she shouted. "Dothraki, ride." A thunder of hooves erupted as the Dothraki charged from both flanks. The Unsullied stood firm, their discipline matched by no other infantry in Essos. Daenerys raised her right arm in signal. At once, Drogon dove. His gargantuan shape cut through the sky, sending a rush of wind that whipped up clouds of dust. The cultists braced their scorpions. Twangs of massive bolts sang out, spearing upward in black arcs. Time seemed to slow. Daenerys watched in mingled dread and fascination as the first siege bolt struck Drogon's flank, only to ricochet with a high-pitched clang. Another bolt glanced off his scales like an arrow bouncing from solid stone. A ripple of shock passed through the enemy ranks. Drogon roared, and from his maw poured a storm of flame, saturating the nearest scorpion crew in an inferno that rendered them into silhouettes of ash. She felt a wild surge of triumph and alarm. Was he truly impervious? The last she had witnessed, Drogon was still vulnerable to wounds, however much stronger his scales had become. But these bolts had simply rebounded. Even the men in her own ranks murmured in awe and confusion. Some of the Dothraki reined their horses to stare at the spectacle in unabashed wonder. The priest's words echoed in her mind. Drogon was an extension of her own divine fire. If she was a goddess, then perhaps her greatest child was unstoppable. Another volley soared upward. More bolts clanged off Drogon's hide, a few snapping in half upon impact, the pieces hurtling back to the ground. Drogon wheeled, spitting another torrent of flame that ignited rows of the enemy. The cultists' ranks began to break. The Dothraki crashed into them from the sides, slashing with lethal grace. The Unsullied marched forward, spears thrusting in disciplined unison. The Black Sun banners crumpled and fell. Malagor, the self-proclaimed high priest, bellowed curses from atop his rearing horse. He flung a vial of black liquid at the ground. Smoke erupted, stinking of sulfur and charred flesh. In the confusion, Daenerys lost sight of him. She ordered the Unsullied to push forward. Columns of flame from Drogon's jaws scorched the battlefield, leaving the crumbling ruin around Valisar wreathed in smoke. The scorching heat of it buffeted Daenerys as she rode among her men, her eyes streaming from the acrid haze. Bodies littered the ground as the charge reached its peak. Screams cut through the din of battle, mingling with the roars of dragons above. Rhaegal and Viserion had joined the fray, unleashing their own flames, though they lacked the terrifying magnitude of Drogon's fury. The Black Sun cultists, ill-prepared for an onslaught of this magnitude, folded under the combined might of dragons, cavalry, and elite infantry. Soon it was over. The last few cultists threw down their weapons or died where they stood. The Dothraki hooped and howled in triumph, brandishing their blood-drenched rocks to the sky. The Unsullied reformed ranks, stoic even in victory. A hush fell over the battlefield, broken by the crackle of lingering flames. Daenerys dismounted, her boots crunching on rubble and scorched earth. The air stung with the tang of ash. She spotted Malagor crumpled against a toppled column, one leg bent at an impossible angle, yet eyes blazing with defiance. As she approached, he spat at her feet. Smoke curled from the hem of his singed robes. "Witch," he rasped, voice laced with venom. "You and your dragon will drown the world in flame, but darkness will come for you yet." Daenerys gazed at him, her heart pounding from the aftermath of battle. "My flame brings liberation, not destruction. You chose to brand me a heretic, to raise arms against me and my people. You forced this." He coughed out a bitter laugh. "Your illusions will crumble. Even your monstrous dragon, invulnerable though he seems, is an affront to the natural order. You will burn nations. The darkness will claim your soul in the end." She felt no triumph at his suffering, only a solemn finality. "If that's what you believe, so be it." She turned to a nearby Unsullied. "Bind him, see that he's tended to. We will decide his fate after a proper interrogation. But Malagor refused to be taken. He lunged for a dagger in his belt. A last, desperate surge. Unsullied spears leveled instantly, and the man impaled himself on the sharpened steel, releasing a gurgle that melted into a final hiss. Blood pooled beneath him. Daenerys stood there, staring at his lifeless form. Another zealot who had chosen death over reason, so certain in the righteousness of his cause. She felt a wave of weariness, the burden of constant conflict and the never-ending swirl of prophecy. A moment later, Drogon landed behind her, stirring the ashes into eddies. He lowered his massive head, nudging her shoulder. She turned and laid a hand on his snout, comforted by his presence. His scales were as hot as a forge, yet she welcomed the contact. This unstoppable, monstrous power was hers to wield and to restrain. In the distance, her troops shouted in victory, chanting her name. But behind the euphoria, Daenerys felt the unspoken question resonate in the hush that followed. Had the Red Priests been right? Was she truly something more than mortal, with a champion that no scorpion or sword could harm? When the dust settled, they set camp among the ruins. The once proud keep was a blackened husk, the cultists' tents reduced to scorched fabric. Daenerys walked among the wounded, offering words of solace. The Red Priests who traveled with them moved through the makeshift infirmary, chanting healing prayers and dispensing ointments. Many of the soldiers, both Unsullied and Dothraki, bore injuries from the vicious close-quarters fight, though mercifully the number of fallen was less than Daenerys had feared. Night cloaked the battlefield with its celestial tapestry. The fires from the day's conflagration still smoldered in pockets. The stench of burnt flesh lingered, reminding Daenerys that victory always came with a heavy cost. She stood on a broken parapet of the ruined keep, gazing out at the silhouettes of the dragons perched nearby. Drogon rested on a collapsed tower, his bulk far exceeding any structure's ability to hold him without crumbling. Yet he lounged there, unconcerned, occasionally letting out a low rumble that resonated through the stone. Rhaegal and Viserion curled together, the green and cream scales reflecting the faint moonlight. They appeared exhausted, though content in their mother's proximity. Footsteps sounded behind her. She glanced back to see Ser Jorah approaching with a respectful bow. His face carried lines of fatigue and relief. "Victory is ours," he said quietly. "It is," she replied, her voice as distant as the desert wind. "Yet I wonder if this is how it will always be. Every time I build something, someone else comes along claiming an opposing vision or prophecy. Faith is a powerful blade that can cut both ways." Jorah stepped beside her, following her gaze to the dragons. "Power always draws challengers, Your Grace. Whether it's in the form of a crown or divinity, people fear what they cannot control." She rested her hands on the scorched parapet. "And they've never controlled me. I've tried to be just, to break chains, to free the oppressed. But what if the chain that binds me is this prophecy, this notion of me as the living goddess of fire?" Jorah hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I believe in you, Daenerys Targaryen, whether goddess or mortal. The titles we wear matter less than the deeds we do. Today, you protected your people from a vile threat. That is enough for me." She felt a fleeting warmth at his steadfast devotion. "Thank you, Jorah." Her gaze lingered on Drogon, who seemed to sense her attention and lifted his head. Even from this distance, she could see the reflection of her campfires dancing in his eyes. "He truly is unstoppable now. I saw the bolts bounce off him. I felt the heat in his scales. It was as though he'd become living iron." "He is your child," Jorah said with a small smile. "If you have ascended in the eyes of the Lord of Light, perhaps he ascends with you. But he remains a creature of power, not conscience. Always remember that." Daenerys nodded. The truth weighed on her. Drogon's destructive potential was immense, and only she could guide it, harness it, prevent it from becoming a scourge. She ran her fingers across the stones, feeling their crumbling edges. Then she turned to go. "We break camp at first light, return to the temple city. The Red Priests must be informed of this threat's defeat." Jorah bowed, his armor catching a glint of moonlight. "As you command." She spent that night in a tent near the edges of the ruins, lulled to sleep by the low breathing of her dragons. In her dreams, she walked through halls of obsidian where unseen choirs chanted her name in worship. The walls dripped with molten rock that glowed ember red. At the end of those corridors, she emerged onto a towering platform overlooking a sea of kneeling figures. Their faces were hidden, yet their voices rose in a crescendo that vibrated her very bones. Then Drogon appeared beside her, not as a beast, but as a black storm with flaming eyes, grown to fill the horizon, blotting out the sun. She felt no fear, only a sense of awe and inevitability. When morning came, she awoke with the taste of ashes in her mouth. The dream refused to fade fully, leaving her with an uneasy swirl of excitement and dread. True to her order, the camp was already stirring. The Unsullied organized their ranks, the Dothraki quietly preparing their horses and gear. Under a pale sunrise, they began their return trek, carrying their wounded with them. The Red Priests trailed in the column's wake, singing low hymns to Lawler. It took another 4 days to recross the desert. The sky remained clear, scorching them by day, chilling them by night. Finally, the city's walls and the grand spires of the Red Temple rose in the distance. Runners were sent ahead to announce their arrival. Word spread like wildfire that the self-declared Shadow Sun cultists had been vanquished and that Drogon's hide had turned aside every weapon. By the time they entered the city, the populace thronged the streets, chanting Daenerys' name or calling her goddess of flame. Some threw flower petals, others burned fragrant herbs in braziers. It was a hero's welcome, magnified tenfold by the mythic aura that now surrounded both Daenerys and her dragon. She dismounted near the temple plaza, letting one of the Dothraki take her horse. Drogon circled overhead, then landed on an elevated platform of stone, built long ago to display the temple's wealth to travelers. The structure groaned under his weight but held firm. People fell to their knees or fled in alarm, but when the dragon only sat there, it emboldened the braver souls to inch closer, curiosity overcoming fear. Daenerys realized how symbolic it was. Here was a living manifestation of her power, a creature that dwarfed even the old legends. Kinvara was waiting on the temple steps, flanked by rows of red-robed priests and priestesses. The vestments they wore glittered with gold thread, embroidered flames that danced in the sunlight. Torches, too, flanked them, though the brightness of day rendered these flames nearly invisible. The crowd hushed as Daenerys ascended the steps. "The goddess returns," Kinvara proclaimed, her voice soaring. "She has triumphed over the black sun, over the shadow that dared challenge the flame of truth. All hail Daenerys, the living goddess of fire." A roar erupted from the crowd, mingling with the calls of trumpets that braziers had replaced. From all corners of the plaza came thunderous claps, cheers, and chants. Daenerys raised a hand, commanding silence. She could see Tyrion and Missandei observing from one side, relief and worry mingling in their expressions. Daenerys spoke, her voice clear, echoing off marble. "The threat is ended, thanks to the bravery of our warriors and the might of our dragons. We stand united against all who would bring chaos and tyranny. Whether you see me as a queen or a divine champion of flame, know that I serve the cause of the free and the just." She swept her gaze over the enraptured faces. "Let this victory be a warning to any who sow terror. The fires of R'hllor, and the dragons I command, will not suffer oppression or cruelty." A deafening ovation followed. Kinvara stepped forward, arms raised high. "Look upon your goddess and see the truth. Drogon, child of her sacred flame, is now impervious to the weapons of men. Is this not a sign of the Lord of Light's favor?" A wave of fervent agreement rippled through the onlookers. Some cried tears of joy, others turned to each other, expressions shining with awe. Tyrion, near the edge, grimaced slightly. Daenerys read his face. The more they declared her goddess, the more complicated her rule would become. Yet part of her could not help feeling that indescribable sense of power. These people believed in her, not out of fear alone, but from genuine conviction that she was their deliverance. That faith could build a new kingdom on stable ground if managed wisely, if she could guard against zealotry. She felt a twist of apprehension remembering the conversation she'd had with her advisors. Revolutions built on faith could easily become oppressive. She would have to be vigilant. As if reading her thoughts, Kinvara's voice dropped to a lower register, audible only to Daenerys and those standing close. "There is more we must do. The war against the Great Darkness does not end with one victory. I have seen glimpses. Shadows gather in distant lands, and your flame must expand until every dark corner of the world is illuminated." Daenerys pressed her lips together, forcing a polite nod. "One step at a time, priestess. For now, let us mend and strengthen what we have." Kinvara bowed her head, eyes shining. "Of course, your radiance. Yet do not forget that the night is long and full of terrors. You are the dawn." That evening, a grand feast took place in the temple's vast courtyard. Trestle tables were laden with roasted meats, exotic fruits, spiced wines. The mood was jubilant. Minstrels played stirring tunes and dancers swirled amid torchlight, their shadows twisting against the temple columns. Daenerys presided over the celebration, though she felt more observer than participant, as if perched on a higher vantage watching mortals rejoice. She forced herself to mingle, to share words of gratitude, to bestow praise upon her warriors. Yet every so often she caught sight of those who looked upon her with near hysteria in their eyes, and it unsettled her. Eventually, she slipped away, weaving through the corridors until she found Tyrion in a side chamber, perusing a stack of scrolls. He paused when she entered, offering a crooked smile. "Enjoying the adoration, your divinity?" She huffed. "Don't call me that." He shrugged. "I only echo what they say." His gaze sobered. "You must be careful, Daenerys. This is more than the usual hero worship. They see you as a deity who can do no wrong, and that sets a perilous stage. If ever you do make a mistake, gods forbid, it could shatter them. People who raise you onto a pedestal can just as quickly cast you down." She wandered around the chamber, her fingers trailing along a dusty tapestry. "Do you have any advice on how to handle a populace that sees me as an omnipotent savior?" Tyrion rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Remind them you're still human. Show humility. Let them know you bleed and feel pain, that you are not infallible. But that's easier said than done when you ride an invincible dragon and walk out of flames unscathed." Daenerys' gaze flicked to the open window, where a sliver of moonlight revealed the silhouette of Drogon perched on the temple's highest parapet. "I never asked for this. But perhaps it's necessary. The power to rebuild a better world. The more they adore me, the more likely they are to follow me without constant bloodshed." "Let's hope so," Tyrion said softly. He rolled up a scroll and set it aside. "For now, we should focus on stability. Rebuild the farmland, encourage trade, establish lines of communication with the nearby free cities. And when we're strong enough, perhaps return to Westeros in force, if that is still your ultimate aim." Her heart stirred at the mention of Westeros, the homeland she had fought so tirelessly to reclaim. "Someday, yes. But first, I must make certain that Essos is at peace, that the people I've freed are not forgotten." Tyrion dipped his head. "Then we shall proceed with caution. We have to keep a close watch on these fervent priests. Even the most well-intentioned faith can lead to atrocities if handled incorrectly." She sighed. "You're right. But for now, I'd rather not think of more battles. I want to see my people celebrate." Tyrion chuckled, eyes glittering with mild amusement. "Then, by all means, go and celebrate with them, your grace. Enjoy a night of respite before the next challenge arises." Daenerys offered him a grateful half-smile and left the chamber. The sounds of singing and dancing continued in the courtyard, the torches casting lively flickers on the polished tiles. At times, she would catch glimpses of men and women, kneeling spontaneously as she passed, their whispers forming a tapestry of devotion. She tried to respond with warmth, but the weight of their expectations pressed heavier with each passing hour. As the night deepened, she sought the open air. She found Drogon perched in the temple's highest courtyard, a space large enough only because of its open roof. He looked relaxed, tail draped over the side of the parapet. A few braziers glowed around the courtyard, illuminating the statue of R'hllor that stood watch with an impassive face. Daenerys approached softly, the hush of her footsteps lost in the dragon's slow breathing. She laid a hand on Drogon's flank. The scales felt as solid as castle-forged steel. In the orange glow of the nearby braziers, she could see no scars, no evidence of old wounds. It was as though his body had undergone a metamorphosis that rendered him even mightier than before, surpassing the legends of Balerion. She wondered if, centuries from now, bards would sing of Drogon as the largest dragon to have ever lived, overshadowing the stories of the Black Dread. Perhaps they would speak of him as an immortal beast, just as they now whispered of her as a goddess. She walked to the parapet edge. The city glimmered below, its streets alive with torchlit revelry. Far off, she heard the faint echo of drums and laughter. This was her domain, a realm of freed slaves, devout priests, ex-mercenaries, and travelers from across the sea. They looked to her for salvation, for the promise of a new era. She closed her eyes, letting the desert breeze cool her skin. Inwardly, she repeated a silent promise. to wield her power justly, to turn her dragon's might not upon the innocent but upon those who would oppress and enslave. She felt a stirring in Drogon's presence as though he understood her resolve. His heat radiated behind her. She could sense the slow rumble of his breathing, a deeper resonance that melded with the distant hum of festival drums. Perhaps the bond between them had changed, become something else. No longer just mother and child, but a synergy of goddess and champion, flame and shadow, unstoppable and ever-burning. She opened her eyes and let the scene wash over her. Tomorrow, she would face the aftermath, managing the priests, balancing worship with governance, walking the tightrope between being a beloved queen and a revered deity. But for this moment, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of solace. If she was the living embodiment of fire in mortal form, she would burn brightly, fiercely, and strive never to be consumed by her own flames. Drogon's eyes glowed like embers in the dark, fixed upon the horizon. A distant wind carried the promise of unknown lands and uncharted battles. Daenerys realized that, just as with her dragon's unceasing growth, her journey was far from its final chapter. The world would test her again and again, pushing her power and her spirit to their limits. But she would not face it alone. She had an invulnerable dragon, her people's faith, and her own unquenchable will. The night breeze kissed her cheeks, carrying the echoes of the chanting crowd from the plaza, chanting her name, her titles, her newly conferred divinity. Daenerys inhaled the warm air, tasting the tang of incense and open flame. In that moment, she embraced it all, her mortal frailties, her extraordinary gifts, and the flickering edge between devotion and fear. High above the rooftops, she stood with Drogon, bigger than Balerion, unscarred and unbreakable. A living goddess or a queen wearing the mantle of divinity, poised to carve her name into the tapestry of history with the fire in her blood and the unstoppable fury of a dragon that no weapon could harm. Wordlessly, she stepped to Drogon's side, placed a palm on the curve of his neck, and gazed into the night. The world was vast, shadows roamed beyond the horizon, but her flame would burn. She would see it through until dawn broke over every corner of the realm, or until her final breath. If the Red Priests had crowned her in living flame, if she wielded the unstoppable might of a dragon grown beyond legend, then let the heavens bear witness. Daenerys Targaryen would shape the fate of empires as both mortal and divine. And far beneath the star-flecked sky, in the hush before the next day's tumult, she allowed herself a single whisper meant only for the silence: Dracarys. Daenerys Targaryen stood upon the temple's highest courtyard as the night breeze carried the hush of distant celebrations. The clang and clamor of the feast drifted on the winds below. Music lilted, voices rose in drunken cheer. Yet here, high above the crowd, a contemplative silence reigned. Drogon's bulk loomed behind her, his breathing a slow rumble in the moonlight. He was nearly as large as the entire courtyard now, wings draped over the parapets, tail coiled in thick loops like the foundation of some living fortress. In truth, he seemed hardly aware of the human festivities beneath him. If the swirl of pipe music and the ring of laughter distracted him, he gave no sign of it. He only stared out into the night's horizon with molten eyes, as if searching for something, danger or promise, beyond mortal ken. Daenerys let her eyes roam over his obsidian scales and the faint red sheen pulsing through the ridges of his neck and belly. The memory of watching siege bolts bounce off him still thrummed through her. Once, a single well-placed scorpion bolt could have wounded him. Now, no metal seemed able to pierce his hide. She thought of Balerion the Black Dread, whose monstrous skull she had seen in the Red Keep's catacombs. By all accounts, Balerion had been the mightiest dragon in living memory, a colossal beast able to melt castles to slag and swallow horses whole. Yet, if the Red Priest spoke truly, Drogon surpassed even that old terror of conquest. The notion chilled Daenerys as much as it thrilled her. She had not needed to dream of overshadowing her ancestors. It seemed fate or prophecy or something older and darker had willed it to be. She laid a hand gently on Drogon's flank. Heat radiated through the scales, a comforting warmth that reminded her of the moment she had emerged unburnt from Khal Drogo's funeral pyre. Drogon turned his head, and the shift of his massive body caused the courtyard stones to creak under the pressure. He gazed at her with an uncanny awareness. She felt, in that moment, that he saw not just his mother but something else, a being wrapped in destiny, crowned by the zeal of thousands. She tried to smile, though her chest felt tight with the weight of what they called her. Goddess of fire. Living flame. She did not speak the words aloud, lest she taste their gravity again. A distant roar of merriment drifted up from the banquet halls. Daenerys closed her eyes for an instant, inhaling the desert air. Beneath the spice-laden scent of the temple braziers and roasted lamb, she detected the faint tang of dust and ruin. The city was thriving, yet the memory of ancient conflicts and fresh battles lingered in every shadowy corner. She thought of the Shadow Sun cultists who had died by Drogon's flame or by unsullied spears. She had vanquished them for the sake of peace, to protect the realm she was forging. But the hush of their demise lingered, pressing against her thoughts. It was both an honor and a horror to wield such unstoppable power. Footsteps sounded at the far end of the courtyard. Tyrion Lannister, his shorter stride echoing off the flagstones. He approached slowly, giving Drogon a wide berth. The dragon's eye flicked toward him, but Drogon made no hostile movement. Tyrion paused at a respectful distance from Daenerys, letting out a breath before speaking. "They're asking for you downstairs," he said quietly. "The priestesses have begun some new ceremony of thanksgiving. There's a statue or an effigy of you, lit by fire. I thought you'd prefer to be informed rather than taken by surprise." Daenerys lowered her gaze. "They've made an idol?" The notion was unsettling. She recalled ancient stories, statues of Valyrian gods scattered through Essos, most of them lost to the doom, worshipped by no one. Now it seemed the Red Priests were determined to craft a living mythology around her. "What precisely are they doing?" Tyrion gave a short sigh. "From what I gather, it's meant to be a moment of reverence. They're chanting your titles and praising the union of you and Drogon as the unstoppable flame of Lawlor. You know, standard worship from fervent cultists who believe they've found their living goddess." She tried to muster a wry smile, but her lips felt stiff. "Will they set me on a gilded throne next, expecting me to hold lightning in one hand and a scepter of fire in the other?" Tyrion's expression was sympathetic, though his eyes shone with mild amusement. "I wouldn't put it past them. They're an excitable bunch. But in fairness, you did save them from a threat that was growing alarmingly fast. To them, that's a miracle. And from their perspective, everything you do now confirms the truth of their prophecies." Daenerys turned her back to Drogon and gazed at Tyrion. "And you? Do you see me as a goddess?" Tyrion shrugged, crossing his arms over his chest. "I see you as Daenerys Targaryen, formidable, brave, at times terrifying. A woman with an iron will, a silver head of hair, and a monstrous lizard that seems impervious to weapons. I've seen enough of the world to know magic runs deeper than many care to admit, but I'm not ready to start building altars." "No offense." She actually found herself relieved at his response. "I'm thankful for your honesty." After a pause, she added, "I'll meet them. Better they see me approach with grace than hide away." They descended the winding steps that led to the heart of the temple complex. The air grew warmer with each level, the glow of braziers intensifying. Priests and priestesses in crimson robes lined the halls, bowing as Daenerys passed. Some called her name in hushed reverence. She kept her chin lifted, her stride even, though inside she felt a churn of unease. Every moment seemed to push her deeper into a role she had never asked for. The corridor opened into a sprawling courtyard where an enormous brazen statue had been erected seemingly overnight. The shape was rough-hewn but recognizable, a tall figure with flowing hair and arms outstretched, flame-like designs etched along the torso. Flames flickered in a circular basin at the statue's feet. Around it, a throng of worshippers chanted a litany that sent a tremor through the air. She caught words in High Valyrian, Old Rhoynish, and other dialects, each calling upon the living flame and mother of dragons. Their collective voices rose and fell like ocean swells. The intensity of their devotion was palpable. Kinvara stood near the statue, bathed in torchlight, her crimson robes nearly indistinguishable from the flames themselves. She looked regal and fearless, arms lifted to the sky as she called out, "She who walks in flame, she who will banish the great darkness, bless us now with your presence." As Daenerys approached, the priestess turned, eyes alight with something akin to triumph. Daenerys glanced at the statue. Though crude in craftsmanship, it bore an unmistakable attempt to capture her likeness, slender limbs, a regal tilt of the head, the hair carved to suggest streaming silver. She knew the posture, it was how she had stood atop the pyramid in Meereen when she first addressed the freed slaves. The knowledge that people had replicated that pose to enshrine her as a god sent a slow shiver through her spine. She inhaled, stepping closer. The chanting fell silent at her approach as though the crowd collectively held its breath. Kinvara's voice rang out echoing off the polished columns. "Blessed is this day, for our goddess of fire steps among us. She bears the unstoppable might of the true flame, and her dragon is the incarnate scourge of shadow." Many in the crowd knelt, others lifted their hands, tears streaming. The air was thick with incense, making the courtyard smell of cinnamon, myrrh, and something more acrid, like burnt offerings. Daenerys raised a hand in silent greeting, then let it fall. "Rise," she said gently, the same word she had used in the previous ceremony. "Please rise. I come as your queen, not an untouchable deity." Some did rise, but others remained pressed to the ground. Kinvara lowered her arms, stepping forward. "Your humility is boundless, yet we see the truth shining around you. Let your children, those freed from bondage, exalt you, that the message of Daenerys' love may spread across Essos and beyond." Daenerys studied the priestess. The fervor in Kinvara's dark eyes was unwavering. Part of Daenerys worried that such zeal, left unchecked, could be as dangerous as any foreign invader. "I only wish for peace and justice," Daenerys said, trying to keep her tone level. "If it pleases you to celebrate our victory over the Shadow Sun cult, then do so. But remember, I ask not for blind worship." A ripple went through the crowd. Some nodded, others looked conflicted, uncertain how to reconcile her mercy with the grandeur they believed she possessed. Kinvara clasped her hands before her chest. "Of course, your radiance. We obey you in all things." Daenerys turned from them, feeling the burn of countless eyes. Tyrion followed her out of the courtyard, and together they retreated to a quieter hallway. Her breathing was shallow, her thoughts swirling. At length she said, "They're building idols of me in a single night. Imagine what they'll do in a year. Or 10. Tyrion pressed his lips together. "Yes, well, fervor has a nasty habit of magnifying itself. The more unstoppable you appear, the more they'll believe you're something beyond mortal flesh." Yet, Daenerys murmured, "How can I deny what happened on the battlefield? Drogon was unharmed by scorpion bolts, the cult was destroyed. These people have seen wonders. They now expect more." They paused by an arched window overlooking the city. Lanterns illuminated the streets, and from this vantage, Daenerys could see the sprawl of dwellings that had grown around the temple. Many of those who worshipped Lawler had flocked here, seeking guidance and marveling at the rumored presence of a living goddess. Farther out lay the older neighborhoods still recovering from conflicts of years past. Daenerys felt a surge of responsibility. She had promised these people freedom, safety, prosperity. If the Red Priests magnified her legend, perhaps it would keep more enemies at bay, at least for a time. She sighed. "Has there been any word from the other free cities? Or from Westeros?" Tyrion nodded. "A few messages. Volantis is both intrigued and wary. They already had a large red temple, as you know, and many of those priests have pledged themselves to you. Politically, that makes the ruling class nervous. They fear your influence could overshadow their own power structures. Lys, on the other hand, is courting alliances, no doubt hoping to profit from your expanding reputation." As for Westeros, he grimaced. A raven arrived, bearing the seal of Storm's End. Daenerys's brow lifted. "Storm's End? Who holds that seat now?" "There's talk of a distant Baratheon cousin, enthroned by a patchwork alliance of minor storm lords once the previous line ended. They style him Lord Roland. D. Baratheon. He's trying to reconstruct alliances since the wars. The letter's tone is polite, even deferential. It requests an audience or some form of negotiation. No mention of you as a goddess, only as the rightful queen of Westeros. Likely they want your favor before you decide to return to the Seven Kingdoms in full force." Daenerys let the words settle. She recalled the storms that had raged outside Storm's End when she was born, recalled the stories Viserys had told her of House Baratheon's fractious relationship with House Targaryen. She also remembered how close she had come to seizing the Iron Throne before fate, and the Great War had diverted her. "I wonder if they view me with fear, or if they see an opportunity." Tyrion's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Probably both. From a distance, you're the conqueror who broke the wheel in Essos and nearly did the same in Westeros. Now there are rumors of your dragon being all but invincible, and the Red Priests declaring you a literal deity. I'd wager some are terrified you'll descend on them with holy war. Others might desire to stand in your light, or so they'll claim, hoping to share in your glory." Daenerys gazed at the city lights. "And what do you advise, Tyrion? Answer them? Invite them to parley?" He considered for a moment. "It might be wise to open lines of communication, if only to prevent misunderstandings. A letter costs nothing compared to an unnecessary war. At the same time, I'd strongly recommend not letting the Red Priests set the tone. The last thing we need is for everyone in Westeros to think you'll burn them alive if they don't convert to worshipping you." She nodded, her lips set in a determined line. "I'll write to this Lord Roland. We'll see if he's genuine or simply seeking advantage." Then she glanced back toward the courtyard. "And I'll keep a careful eye on Kinvara. Her faith is potent, and while she's done much to rally support, I sense that if ever my decisions clash with her beliefs, we'll have a difficult situation." They made their way back to Daenerys's private chambers. These were luxurious apartments once reserved for high-ranking priests, adorned with red silk tapestries and glowing lamps in carved niches. Incense perfumed the air, thick but not overpowering. Missandei awaited them within, seated at a small lacquered table, writing on a parchment. She rose at once, offering a warm smile. Her gaze lingered on Daenerys, measuring the slight tension in her brow. "Your Grace," Missandei said, "I've been drafting responses to the letters from Lys and from certain nobles in Meereen. They all want your endorsement on trade pacts, tributes, and the like." Daenerys approached the table, scanning the documents. "We'll continue to encourage trade. Let them see that we intend to prosper peacefully. I won't have my name used to spark more wars than necessary." She glanced at the Red Temple letter, specifying an upcoming grand festival in Volantis. "But we must also be mindful of the territories that remain fragile." They spent an hour reviewing matters of state, with Tyrion offering the perspective of a strategist and Missandei ensuring that each response was clear and diplomatically sound. Throughout these discussions, Daenerys noticed the subtle tension that had always existed whenever the Red Temple's expansion was mentioned. Tyrion fretted about zealotry. Missandei, who had seen Daenerys's mercies firsthand, tried to reconcile the rising wave of fervor with the Queen's more grounded approach. Yet neither contradicted the tide of devotion that now seemed unstoppable. When they finished, Missandei asked quietly, "Do you truly intend to stay here indefinitely, or do you yearn to return to Westeros? The letters from Storm's End, they bring all that back to the forefront, don't they?" Daenerys exhaled. "I never forgot. I left part of myself behind in Westeros along with the sacrifices made there. Yet I cannot abandon the people I freed in Essos. And now, with the Red Priests proclaiming me a goddess, I find myself in an even stranger position. If I step away too soon, some might see it as a divine sign to tear each other apart in the name of interpretation. If I remain too long, Westeros may slip from my grasp or plunge into deeper chaos." Missandei nodded in understanding. "I believe your cause is just, no matter which side of the sea you stand upon. But your presence here has stabilized so much. The freedmen look to you as their liberator." Tyrion added, "Then perhaps we need to build a structure that can endure without you physically here. Appoint governors, local councils, and keep the Red Priests' influence in check by balancing them with secular authorities. If you can ensure a stable Essos, returning to Westeros becomes feasible." Daenerys' eyes shone with distant resolve. "Yes, we'll do that. We'll draft a new system for the free cities under my protection. We'll gather the best advisors from each region, former slaves, local leaders, and those who fought to overthrow the old masters. We'll keep a garrison of Unsullied to maintain order. And the Dothraki," she paused, recalling how the Dothraki often grew restless when they felt confined. "We'll ensure they have reason to remain loyal, perhaps in helping guard trade routes." "We have a plan," Tyrion said with cautious optimism. "Though the Red Temple will undoubtedly try to influence it, shaping laws to align with their theology." Daenerys' voice hardened slightly. "They may worship me if they wish, but I won't let them become tyrants in my name." The days that followed were a swirl of activity. Daenerys convened meetings with representatives from each city that had recognized her authority: Meereen, Yunkai, Astapor, still struggling to recover from repeated conflicts, New Guise, and others. Freedmen's councils had blossomed in some places, while in others the old nobility tried to cling to power by swearing fealty to Daenerys. She listened, deliberated, and drafted a charter that established certain rights for citizens, including the prohibition of slavery under pain of death. Tyrion's deft hand guided the negotiations, ensuring that every faction felt heard while safeguarding Daenerys' overarching goals. Missandei managed the immense load of correspondence, forging cordial ties with lords and merchants who once might have despised Daenerys for breaking their slave trade. Throughout it all, the Red Priests hovered in the background, an ever-present flame. Kinvara appeared at crucial gatherings, praising Daenerys' wisdom, citing visions of a new dawn. Her words carried an undercurrent of expectation, that Daenerys' power came from R'hllor, and thus all laws should reflect the glory of the Lord of Light. Some freedmen, grateful for Daenerys' help, embraced this idea eagerly, seeing in R'hllor's worship a unifying force. Others, especially those who still clung to different gods, chafed at the pressure. Daenerys walked a fine line, insisting on freedom of religion while not openly alienating the Red Priests who had become one of her pillars of support. Evening after evening, Daenerys found herself reviewing agreements, signing edicts, mediating disputes. When weariness pressed on her, she would slip away to see Drogon. He had taken to perching atop the temple spires or gliding over the city at dusk, letting the setting sun gleam off his titanic wings. Rhaegal and Viserion remained close, but the difference in size was obvious. Visitors gaped at Drogon as if he were a living mountain of black and red, while his siblings seemed merely formidable. The Red Priest spun tales that Drogon was blessed by the goddess's breath, each day growing closer to immortality. Daenerys tried to quell such talk, but the rumor spread faster than wildfire. One twilight, after a day of relentless counsels, she climbed the broad temple steps to find Kinvara waiting. The priestess, looking almost statuesque in her crimson robes, watched the sky where Drogon soared with slow sweeps of his wings. "You've done well," Kinvara said softly when Daenerys neared. "Your name reverberates through Essos. Even in Westeros, whispers carry your legend, and the might of Drogon, unstoppable. It is exactly as the flames foretold." Daenerys glanced at her. "If R'hllor granted me such power, then all I can do is wield it responsibly. I won't let zeal consume these lands. The freedmen deserve better than replacing one form of oppression with another." Kinvara bowed her head. "Of course, your radiance. Yet the flame cannot be contained by mortal constraints. It will burn away the old and forge a new world. You are the key to that forging. The shadow still dwells in the west, and it must be cleansed." Daenerys heard the quiet insistence in the priestess's voice. "You refer to Westeros. There is still war and chaos there, I know. But I must first ensure stability here before I take on another conquest." Kinvara's dark eyes gleamed. "Stability, yes. But do not let the illusions of this realm's peace delay your true purpose. The Red Temple stands ready to serve you wherever you go. We have faithful in Bravos, in Pentos, in Volantis, even in the corners of Westeros. They await your arrival, believing you to be the promised deliverer." The rightful dawn. Daenerys felt a flicker of conflict. She recalled the darker parts of prophecies swirling around Azor Ahai, the forging of Lightbringer requiring a great sacrifice. She had never fully embraced that name for herself, though she had fought the White Walkers, had stood against the Night King. The Red Priests were all too eager to shape her story. "If I go, it will be on my terms. I will not be the instrument of mindless fanaticism." Kinvara nodded once as though satisfied with that vow. "Your will be done, living flame." She departed and Daenerys was left alone on the steps. Drogon circled above, letting out a low roar. She watched him, torn between pride and apprehension. He had become a symbol of her ascendancy and also a potential herald of devastation if she were ever driven to wrath. When she returned to her chambers, she found a missive bearing the seal of Storm's End. Tyrion and Missandei had left it for her with a note explaining they were preparing a formal response. Curiosity quickened her pulse. She broke the seal and read, eyes darting over the elegant script. Lord Roland Baratheon's words were respectful, offering cautious praise for her achievements in Essos. He spoke of trade, the need for peace, and an invitation for her to send an envoy or come in person to Storm's End to discuss the future of the Seven Kingdoms. He avoided any mention of her divinity, focusing instead on her lineage as a Targaryen, her once strong claim to the Iron Throne, and the possibility of forging alliances. She set the parchment down, thinking of the land she had not seen in years, its rolling green hills, storm-lashed coasts, towering keeps. A part of her yearned to set foot on Dragonstone once more, to fly Drogon over the narrow sea and let the people see the return of House Targaryen. But how would they greet her now? As a queen? A conqueror? A goddess? Over the following weeks, she continued refining her governance in Essos. Councils formed in each city under the nominal guidance of a representative loyal to her. The freedmen largely seemed content to worship her as a living savior if it meant no return of slavery. The Red Priests expanded their influence, opening new temples and holding festivals in her name, though Daenerys insisted that no one be forced to attend. Tensions rose occasionally, particularly in Meereen, where some merchant houses still revered the old gods of guise, but she dispatched neutral arbiters to quell any violence. Word spread that she was considering a return to Westeros. Merchants carried the rumor, fueling speculation about a second Targaryen conquest, this time led by a dragon mightier than Balerion. Some foreign princes sent gifts, hoping to win favor. A delegation from Pentos arrived with lavish presents, silk, gold, exotic beasts, pleading for a treaty that guaranteed them safe passage if Daenerys extended her dominion. She listened politely, aware that every city that allied with her now essentially declared itself under the protection of a living goddess. The thought still made her uneasy. At last, the day arrived when she could no longer postpone the final decision. She summoned her war council to a grand hall within the temple. There, a long table had been set amid pillars wreathed in carved flames. Torches flickered around them, and the hush that settled was laced with anticipation. Tyrion sat on her right, Missandei on her left. Grey Worm stood behind them, impassive yet vigilant. Yora stood near Daenerys' side, arms crossed. Several captains of the Unsullied and leaders of the Dothraki Khalasar were present, as well as a small cluster of freedmen representatives. Daenerys rose from her seat, her gaze traveling across those gathered. I have received multiple requests that I return to Westeros. Some lords seek alliance, some no doubt fear me. I have spent long years liberating Essos from slavers and tyrants. Yet I have never forgotten the Seven Kingdoms. My birthright, yes, but also a land battered by war. If I go, I will not simply conquer. I must bring stability, or else what good is it to claim a throne built on bones? A murmur passed through the room. One of the freedmen stepped forward. Your Grace, we owe you everything. But we fear your departure might weaken our security. Without you, or your dragons, might not the old slavers rise again? Tyrion interjected gently. We have set up councils and a standing garrison of Unsullied in every major city. The days of slavery are gone. Even the wealthiest lords know better than to challenge the might of Daenerys Targaryen's forces. Grey Worm inclined his head. The Unsullied are loyal, always. We will hold these cities. Yora cleared his throat. Still, it's a valid concern. If our queen leaves, some opportunists might test our resolve. We must ensure swift communication. Dragons can fly across seas, but that doesn't help day-to-day governance once she's gone. Daenerys met the freedman's worried gaze. I will not abandon you to chaos. I will leave Regal and Viserion here to guard the major cities, one stationed in Meereen, the other in New Guise. Under the command of riders I trust. She paused, knowing how difficult this decision was. Separating her dragon brood might hamper her own strength, but she also knew it was a necessary compromise. Drogon will go with me. And the Unsullied. The Dothraki. I will bring many of them, but not all. Some may prefer to remain. That choice is theirs. A Dothraki blood rider stepped forward, face stern. Where you go, we go, Khaleesi. We crossed the poison water once. We will do it again. She felt a pang of gratitude. Very well. To those who remain, your task is to ensure the peace we have fought so hard for. You will be revered here, not just as warriors, but as guardians of this new world. She glanced at Tyrion. He rose and spread a map across the table. It showed the narrow sea, the coastline of Westeros from Dorne up to the Vale, sketched with bounding lines of territory. I propose we land at Dragonstone, he said. It was once the seat of House Targaryen, and it's an ideal place to establish a foothold. Storm's End is further south, but close enough to open lines of negotiation with Lord Roland Baratheon. Daenerys traced the map with her fingertips. Memories flickered of the painted table in the old fortress, of the swirl of storms outside. That sounds wise. Dragonstone is defensible and it holds deep meaning for House Targaryen. From there, we can see who comes forward in friendship or challenges us in hostility. The freedmen representatives exchanged uneasy glances, but ultimately they bowed their heads in acceptance. The plan, once intangible, solidified in the flickering torchlight. Daenerys straightened, addressing them all. We embark within the month. Tyrion, you will finalize arrangements for ships and supplies. Yora, coordinate the Unsullied and Dothraki. Grey Worm, see that your captains are prepared for half to remain and half to sail with me. Missandei, you will assist with the administrative side, ensuring the freed cities' councils are ready for our departure. Kinvara appeared in the hall's entrance just as Daenerys finished speaking. Her eyes shone with a rapturous gleam as if she, too, had foreseen this moment. Then it is decided, the priestess said, voice echoing softly. The flame shall cross the sea. Westeros will see its true dawn. No one openly contested her words. The gathering dispersed, the tension replaced by focused urgency. Outside, the city glowed under a late afternoon sun. The day felt both ordinary and momentous, as if the normal cycle of life persisted even as Daenerys took a step that would change the shape of nations. The subsequent weeks passed in a blur of logistics. Fleets were gathered, some from Pentos, others from the newly rebuilt ports of Meereen. The Dothraki horses were carefully stabled in massive transports. The warriors themselves muttered about water travel but accepted it for her sake. Supplies of dried meats, grains, fruits, and wine were loaded by the ton. Blacksmiths worked day and night, forging fresh spears, swords, and armor for the Unsullied. Daenerys oversaw every detail she could, determined not to repeat the chaotic mistakes of previous campaigns. She also spent time training with Drogon. Each dawn, she flew him beyond the city walls, soaring over desert expanses. He dove through the sky with fluid, terrifying grace, letting loose bellows of flame that scorched the sands below. No arrow, spear, or bolt from her mock exercises so much as scratched him. Armored dummies on the ground splintered and burned with the barest contact of his fire. Observing from a safe distance, the freedmen gasped and marveled. The Red Priest said these displays were gifts of the Lord of Light, forging an invincible champion for his chosen. Daenerys felt the raw surge of power beneath her thighs as Drogon angled his wings to ride the wind, and she feared that with such might at her command, the line between righteous war and sheer destruction could be as thin as a single breath. On the eve of departure, Daenerys convened one last assembly of the Freedmen Councils. She stood in the Grand Temple courtyard beneath the statue of herself that the Red Priests had erected. Flickering torchlight cast dancing shadows on the brazen effigy. Tyrion, Missandei, and Jorah flanked her, and around them gathered the local leaders. Kinvara lingered near the edges, accompanied by silent priestesses in robes of deep crimson. Daenerys lifted her voice, calm yet resonant. "We embark for Westeros at dawn. I leave you not in abandonment, but in confidence that you will uphold the values we established. Freedmen, the cost of your liberty was paid in blood and fire. Guard it well. Should slavers return, defy them. Should tyrants rise, cast them down. The Unsullied who remain will protect you. My dragons Regal and Viserion will watch from the skies, ensuring that no fortress of chains can be rebuilt in our lands." A thunderous cheer erupted. Some shouted her name, others called her Mother of Dragons, and many chanted Goddess of Fire. She felt the wave of devotion wash over her. For a moment, she saw the possibility that faith, if guided with compassion, could bind a people stronger than any chain of iron. It was a fragile hope, but hope nonetheless. Kinvara stepped forward. "We will keep the flame alive in your absence. Spread the truth of your mercy and power. Let all know. That when darkness looms, the living flame shall return to banish it." Daenerys inclined her head. She thanked the freedmen for their trust and promised to come back if ever their freedom was in peril. Then she left the courtyard to prepare for the journey. The evening air felt charged, as if a storm might roll in from the sea. She welcomed the slight chill reminiscent of the cooler nights she once knew. Her mind flashed back to distant memories of Pentos, of nights spent in fear of assassins and uncertain of her fate. How different she was now, and how formidable her allies. Dawn broke in a blaze of gold and pink. The harbor was alive with activity. Dozens of ships waited at anchor, their sails emblazoned with the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen or with improvised symbols of the freedmen. Ramps clattered, horses whinnied as the Dothraki led them aboard the largest vessels. The Unsullied boarded in disciplined ranks, weapons gleaming. Local citizens thronged the docks, waving farewell, chanting blessings to Lawler, to Daenerys, to the future. Overhead, Drogon circled, letting out an occasional roar that reverberated across the waters. Daenerys stood at the prow of the lead ship, clad in leather and scaled black armor. Tyrion was just behind her, scanning the horizon. Missandei organized the final loading of supplies, while Jorah oversaw security. Grey Worm stood stoic among the Unsullied. Together, they watched as the anchors were raised, sails unfurled, and the flotilla slowly drifted from the harbor into the open sea. Behind them, the temple city shone in the early light, crowned by the imposing silhouette of Drogon perched momentarily on a spire before he took flight to follow the fleet. As land receded, Daenerys felt a tumult of emotion, pride, anticipation, and a gnawing sense of the unknown. She recalled the day she had first crossed the sea with her Khalasar, uncertain if she would ever see Westeros. Now, she returned not as a claimant with borrowed armies, but as a conqueror with her own unstoppable dragon, revered by a faith that spanned continents. She gripped the ship's railing, eyes fixed on the horizon. The narrow sea glittered under the morning sun, a boundary between her achievements in Essos and her destiny in Westeros. Drogon's shadow flicked across the water, a promise of fire and fury for any who opposed her. The crossing was swift and largely uneventful, save for a storm that battered the fleet on the second night. Lightning split the sky, and winds howled across the decks, forcing even the Dothraki to cling to ropes they would normally disdain. Yet Daenerys felt an odd serenity when Drogon soared through the tempest, unleashing roars that seemed to rival the thunder. Not a single ship was lost, though all were battered by the gale. In the morning's calm, the crew whispered that their queen's divine presence had shielded them. On the fifth day, a cry rang out from the crow's nest, "Land ho!" Daenerys hurried to the prow, Tyrion at her side. The shape of Dragonstone's cliffs emerged from the mists, jagged black rock rising from the sea like a sentinel. Memories stirred in Daenerys' mind, the painted table, the stone dragons perched along the battlements, the endless pounding of waves. It felt like stepping into a dream half-remembered, half-feared. The fleet anchored in the sheltered bay. Dothraki riders, restless from days at sea, hastily disembarked. The Unsullied marched onto the ash-black sands, forming neat lines. A swirl of wind carried the scent of salt and seaweed. Daenerys stepped onto Westerosi soil for the first time since she had left after her near victory, and it felt like both a homecoming and the beginning of a new campaign. Dragonstone loomed before her. She mounted a waiting horse and led her forces up the winding cliff road to the castle gates. Once, this fortress had been left nearly deserted, but news of her impending arrival must have traveled quickly. The gates stood open, guarded by a handful of nervous men in faded livery. They bowed or knelt as Daenerys' retinue passed, unsure whether to call her a queen or a goddess. Inside the courtyard, she dismounted, handing the reins to a trembling stable boy. She surveyed the ancient walls, the stone carvings of dragons swirling across arches and towers. Tyrion stepped forward, letting out a wistful sigh. "Feels like yesterday I stood here, planning an invasion." Daenerys offered a thin smile. "Then let us see if we've grown wiser with time." She nodded to Grey Worm, who directed the Unsullied to secure the perimeter. The Dothraki milled behind, their war horses snorting, uncertain what to make of a place so bleak and windswept compared to Essos. Above, Drogon soared in lazy arcs, the morning sun flashing off his scales. Even the fortress's ancient stone seemed to recoil from the idea of a dragon so large. She climbed the steps to the great doors of the keep, memories washing over her. Within the throne room, she found it largely unchanged, gray stone floors, high ceilings where carved dragon heads jutted like gargoyles. Dust motes danced in slanted light. It smelled of stale air and old ashes, as though the fires in the hearth had not been lit for some time. Daenerys approached the central dais, recalling how she had once claimed the seat. She remembered her council, her allies, her hopes for a swift conquest of the Iron Throne. So much had happened since then. "There will be plenty of time to refamiliarize yourself with these halls," Tyrion said softly, coming to her side. "We should send ravens to every lord who might be inclined to treat with us. And to Storm's End, of course." Daenerys ran her hand along the arm of the carved stone seat that served as Dragonstone's throne. "Yes, let them know I have returned, and that I come in peace, provided they do not challenge me." A hush settled, broken only by the shuffle of unsullied armor as they began clearing debris and preparing the keep for residence. Yura approached and offered a small bow. "The fortress is secure. Our men report no threats. It appears the caretaker left soon after news of your coming. We'll restore basic supplies from the stored provisions, though I suggest sending out hunting parties for fresh game." Daenerys nodded. She felt a swirl of excitement and apprehension. "Good. Let everyone see that we do not come as raiders but as rightful rulers. Offer fair coin to local fishermen and farmers for their goods. We will not starve them with forced tribute." Yura inclined his head and moved off to oversee the tasks. Tyrion and Missandei began dictating messages for the ravens, summoning local lords to meet under a banner of truce. Grey Worm dispatched scouts to ensure no hostile armies approached. Daenerys took a moment to breathe it all in. She had returned, but the true test was yet to come. Westeros had changed while she was gone. It might not bow so easily just because her dragon was unstoppable. Before nightfall, Daenerys ventured onto a high balcony that overlooked the sea. The wind whipped her silver hair, bringing a chill that contrasted sharply with the deserts of Essos. Below, the black sand beach curved like a crescent and her ships lay at anchor in the bay. The horizon stretched westward where the rest of the Seven Kingdoms waited. Drogon perched on a rocky outcropping near the castle, a living fortress of scale and muscle. She could hear his low rumble over the crash of waves. A presence stirred behind her. She turned to see Kinvara, whose crimson robes stood out sharply against the black stones. The priestess had chosen to sail with Daenerys, bringing a contingent of red priests to spread their fervor. "You have touched Westeros' shores," Kinvara said, voice subdued. "The flame crosses the sea, and soon all shall witness your power. The Lord of Lights will unfold." Daenerys clasped her hands to keep them from trembling in the cold. "I didn't come here to conquer Westeros for a red god's glory. I came for my birthright and to unite these lands under a just rule." Kinvara lowered her gaze, her lips curving in a slight smile. "Justice and light are one in the eyes of Lawler. Fear not, your grace. Faith can be a gentle flame, warming hearts to your cause if you so desire." Daenerys studied her, recalling the frantic worship in Essos. "Be sure it remains gentle. I will not have you burning septs or terrorizing innocents. Kinvara bowed her head. As you command. Only remember that your arrival fulfills ancient prophecy. Some will resist the truth, some will resent the brightness of your flame. We must be prepared. When Kinvara withdrew, Daenerys leaned on the balcony's edge, letting the salt wind fill her lungs. She remembered the faith of the Seven and how it once held sway over the common folk. No doubt they'd see her as a challenge if she came proclaiming another god. Though she herself made no such proclamations, the presence of red priests might be enough to incite conflict. She closed her eyes, hoping it would not come to that. Within a fortnight, replies trickled back from various corners of the Stormlands, the Reach, and even King's Landing. Some lords were eager to meet, to see for themselves if the rumors of her unstoppable dragon were true. Others offered polite refusals, claiming obligations or neutrality. A few returned missives laden with veiled hostility, reminding her that Westeros had fought off outside invaders before. One message stood out. From Storm's End, Lord Roland Baratheon himself invited Daenerys to parley on neutral ground, a small castle named Sungate, situated on the border of the Stormlands and Crownlands. The tone was diplomatic, acknowledging her Targaryen heritage but also expressing caution. Tyrion read the letter aloud in the chamber where the painted table stood. The ancient carved map of Westeros sprawled beneath them, each region meticulously represented. Daenerys listened with half-lidded eyes, imagining the men who awaited her across this land. Sungate, not a large fortress, but well-placed, Tyrion noted, tapping the table. There's a wide field outside its walls. Good for a parley, but also suspiciously convenient if someone wanted to set up an ambush. Lord Roland seems genuine, but we can't be careless. Daenerys leaned forward, studying the painted table. We'll go with an appropriate escort. The Unsullied can surround the area and Drogon can circle overhead. No one would dare risk open treachery under those conditions. Tyrion smirked. One would hope. Of course, cunning enemies might believe they can kill you with cunning traps or poisons. But yes, an ambush would be unlikely if Drogon is present. You've seen what he can do to armies. She thought back to the swirling desert battle, the Shadow Sun cultists who had fallen in droves. Very well, she said, pressing her palms on the table's surface. Send word that I accept Lord Roland's invitation. We meet in 7 days at Sungate. They made the necessary preparations. Scouts traveled ahead, verifying the security of the roads. The Dothraki chafed at the cautious pace, eager to roam the open fields, but Daenerys insisted on discipline. Grey Worm selected a contingent of Unsullied to accompany her, while the rest secured Dragonstone and patrolled the coastline. Tyrion, Yora, and Missandei would all ride with her. Kinvara expressed a desire to come, but Daenerys firmly asked her to remain behind. She could already imagine the reception if she arrived surrounded by red priests proclaiming her divinity. Better to make a more measured impression. The morning of departure, Dragonstone's courtyard bustled. Horses stamped the ground, knights and Unsullied gathered in formation, and Daenerys adjusted the bridle on her silver mare. Tyrion, mounted on a sturdy chestnut, looked mildly disgruntled at the notion of so much horse riding. Yora, more accustomed to the saddle, checked the harness on his own mount. Missandei rode near Daenerys, face calm despite the tension thrumming through the air. Drogon descended onto the courtyard with a roar that reverberated in Daenerys's bones. She felt a surge of confidence. The fortress's basalt walls looked dwarfed by his enormous wings. If anyone in Westeros doubted the tales of her dragon's growth, they would soon see the truth. They set out, crossing the causeway that led from Dragonstone to the mainland. A stiff wind buffeted them, carrying the briny scent of the sea. Once on solid land, they moved inland through rolling hills and sparse forests, the Unsullied forming a disciplined spearhead. Drogon soared overhead, casting a colossal shadow across the fields. Peasants and travelers along the road gawked at the sight, some fleeing in terror, others bowing in astonishment. Now and then, Daenerys spied small folk kneeling in prayer, perhaps to the Seven or perhaps to Lawler, uncertain which deity had brought this black-winged colossus. She felt pangs of guilt, remembering how she had wanted to be beloved, not feared. Yet fear and awe had become intertwined in her presence. Everywhere she went, the line blurred between savior and conqueror, queen and goddess. They camped at night in the lee of old ruins or forest edges, always setting watch. Tyrion would pore over local maps, muttering about the region's lords and sworn houses. Yora and Grey Worm patrolled restlessly, ensuring no one approached unseen. Missandei lit a small campfire to keep the autumn chill at bay, and Daenerys would sit quietly, thinking of the path that had led her here. She wondered if any spy or agent of an enemy roamed these woods, planning to test Drogon's rumored invulnerability. If so, they would discover the truth soon enough. On the 5th day, they neared Sungate. A scout galloped back, reporting that Lord Roland's banners had been sighted. The fortress lay perched on a slight rise, surrounded by farmland that had turned golden with late-season wheat. The walls were modest, little more than sturdy stone ramparts topped by a small keep. Outside those walls stretched a wide meadow where Daenerys observed rows of tents, heraldic flags fluttering in the breeze. The Baratheon banner, a crowned stag on a field of gold, stood foremost. Daenerys ordered the Unsullied to fan out, encircling the meadow at a distance. Drogon descended with a thunderous gust, flattening tall grass. She dismounted her mare and walked forward, flanked by Yora, Missandei, and Tyrion. Ahead, she saw a party of knights in polished steel approach, led by a tall man with broad shoulders and a short-cropped beard. This, she surmised, must be Lord Roland Baratheon. He halted a respectful distance away, then removed his helm, tucking it under his arm. "Your Grace," he said, bowing low. "I am Roland Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End. Welcome to Sungate. I appreciate that you accepted my invitation." Daenerys inclined her head. "Lord Baratheon, thank you for receiving us. You've shown courtesy where others might have turned away." She noted the measured look in his eyes. He was no simpering courtier, nor did he radiate hostility. Rather, he bore the practiced air of a man trying to gauge a dangerous situation. He led them closer to the fortress gates, where a large pavilion had been erected for the parley. "I thought it best we speak here, under the open sky, so there can be no suspicion of hidden threats. The keep is at your disposal should you wish for lodging, but I wanted no illusions." Tyrion gave a small, approving nod. Grey Worm silently signaled for the Unsullied to maintain position. Drogon settled in the meadow, his sheer presence sending uneasy ripples through the Baratheon men. Horses stomped nervously, knights exchanged glances. Yet none tried to attack or run, they recognized the futility. Inside the pavilion, servants had laid out refreshments, bread, cheese, wine. Daenerys took a seat at a low table opposite Lord Roland, with Tyrion and Missandei on either side. Yora stood behind her, arms crossed. Lord Roland's knights positioned themselves along the edges, hands near their sword hilts. The tension was palpable but contained. Roland cleared his throat, focusing on Daenerys. "I've heard many accounts of your deeds in Essos, Your Grace. You freed slaves, toppled tyrants, and then vanished beyond the narrow sea. Now you return with an army and a dragon said to be impervious to all weapons. I'm sure you can guess what that does to a realm still licking its wounds from past wars." Daenerys met his gaze evenly. "I understand. Westeros has suffered greatly, wars for the throne, wars against the undead, strife between lords. I did not come to sow more chaos. I come because this was once my family's kingdom and I see a chance to heal what has been shattered. A queen does not stand idly by while her birthright is left in ruins." Roland listened, nodding thoughtfully. "The Iron Throne, it's more a symbol now than a seat of true power. The 7 kingdoms have fractured. The North rules itself. Dorne stands aloof. The Riverlands and the Westerlands cling to fragile alliances. The Crownlands are overshadowed by the faith of the 7, which tries to hold them together but with little success." He paused, his face grave. "I worry that a new war for the throne will tear us apart again." Tyrion interjected, "A new war may not be necessary if lords can see reason. If they accept Daenerys Targaryen as the rightful monarch." A knight near Roland scoffed under his breath. Lord Roland shot him a warning glance. "I can speak only for the Stormlands. I am willing to consider bending the knee on condition that you guarantee fair governance, protection for my people, and no forced changes to our customs. We have many devout followers of the 7. The rumors of red priests crossing with you have caused unease." Daenerys folded her hands. "I do not compel anyone to worship as the red priests do. My forces contain men and women of many faiths. Yet some see me as their prophesied savior. I cannot unmake their beliefs, but I can promise that no one in Westeros will be forced to convert." Roland exhaled, relief flickering on his face. "That is good to hear. Still, you must realize the High Septon in King's Landing is wary. They remember how you once threatened to burn the city if it did not surrender. People fear the power of dragons." She studied him a moment, choosing her words carefully. "My dragons are indeed powerful, but fear is not my goal. I wish for respect, for unity, for progress. If the High Septon wishes to speak, let him do so. I do not seek to replace the faith of the 7 with a foreign religion. Let the realm keep its gods so long as it does not conspire against the crown." Roland exchanged glances with his knights. "I will need more than words, Your Grace. Will you swear to protect the Stormlands against any threat, be it Iron-born raiders or rebellious lords, as a true monarch must?" Daenerys inclined her head. "On my honor, yes. Bend the knee and you will have the might of House Targaryen behind you, including my armies and my dragons. That is a vow I do not make lightly. The air tensed as Roland deliberated. Then, with a measured nod, he rose from his seat and sank to one knee before her. His knights murmured in surprise or approval, uncertain if they should follow suit. Roland placed a hand over his heart. Then let it be known that I, Roland Baratheon, swear fealty to Daenerys Targaryen as the rightful queen of Westeros. May the seven bear witness. A hush followed. Daenerys rose, touched by his gesture. She motioned for him to stand. Rise, Lord Baratheon. From this day forward, you and your house are under my protection. I name you Warden of the Stormlands. Serve faithfully, and I shall never betray your trust. He stood, relief and solemnity interwoven on his face. A few of his knights followed his example, kneeling briefly to signal acceptance. The tension in the pavilion eased, replaced by a cautious optimism. Daenerys signaled for the servants to pour wine, and they shared a brief toast to the new alliance. Tyrion offered a subtle smile, Yora allowed himself a nod of approval, and Missandei's eyes shone with quiet pride. One region had been won over with diplomacy, not fire. After the parley ended, Daenerys and her retinue joined Roland outside the fortress. The Lord introduced her to some of his bannermen, men and women who eyed Drogon with a mixture of dread and awe. Daenerys allowed them to see the dragon up close, at least as close as was safe, while reassuring them that so long as they kept faith, Drogon's flame would not turn upon them. She saw how their gazes flicked to the scorpion-like war machines near the fortress walls, half hidden under tarps, evidence they had prepared for the worst. She made no comment, merely letting them observe Drogon's unscarred hide and the scorpion bolts lying unused. As evening fell, Lord Roland insisted they remain as guests. The keep's hall was small but serviceable, lit by torches that cast flickers over weathered tapestries. Daenerys took her seat at the high table with Roland on one side and Tyrion on the other. A modest feast was laid out: roast venison, fresh bread, a stew of root vegetables. Roland apologized for the plainness, explaining that war and poor harvests had strained the region's resources. Daenerys thanked him nonetheless. She understood that lords who had suffered ruinous wars could ill afford extravagant banquets. Over the meal, they discussed matters of governance, collecting taxes to rebuild roads, dealing with bandits who preyed on travelers, and the importance of trade with the Reach. Roland seemed eager to prove himself a loyal ally while also seeking Daenerys' commitment to aiding in the Stormlands recovery. She gave him the assurance that shipments of grain and resources could come from Essos, bridging the gap until the local harvest improved. A hush fell toward the end of the meal. Roland cleared his throat. If I may speak plainly, Your Grace, many will hesitate to bend the knee without seeing more proof of your benevolence. Could you, for instance, help bring relief to some of the war-ravaged regions? If the small folk see you as a protector rather than a conqueror, more lords may join you willingly. Tyrion responded before Daenerys could. A wise suggestion, my lord. We have access to supplies from across the sea: grain, salted fish, healing salves. Such acts of mercy cost us relatively little and earn a great deal of goodwill. Daenerys took a moment to consider. Yes, let it be done. Tyrion, arrange caravans. Let them distribute what is needed to towns that have suffered the worst. Lord Baratheon, your men can assist in escorting and ensuring the goods reach their intended destinations. Roland's face brightened with gratitude. It would be an honor. My people will see you truly care for their well-being. When the feast concluded, Daenerys left the hall for a breath of fresh air, stepping onto a small balcony overlooking the castle yard. Stars glimmered overhead, and the faint chorus of crickets rose from the meadow. She gazed into the night, reflecting on the day's progress. This was what she had hoped for, loyalty that did not require destruction. She sensed a figure approach and turned to see Yora. He offered a deferential bow. You handled that well, Khaleesi. A gentle sigh escaped her. It's a start. If only every lord were as open to reason. But some might test me, wanting to see whether I truly am unstoppable. I dread the day I must prove that in battle again. Yora lowered his gaze. Westeros has known nothing but conflict for so long. In time, they'll see you bring more than war. She let the silence stretch, hearing only the soft rustle of the wind. I hope so, she said at last. My heart weighs heavy with all the talk of gods and prophecies. I want them to follow me for justice, not out of fear or misguided worship. You are not the first ruler to be deified, Yora said gently. Remember, The Valyrians considered themselves god-kings in their height of power. But you are different. You have compassion that they lacked. She laid a hand on the cold stone parapet. Yes, and I must keep it. Power without mercy leads to ruin. The Shadow Sun cult in Essos was a reminder of how twisted faith can become when it's used to justify cruelty. I won't let that happen here. Yora nodded, respect in his eyes. Then you'll succeed. You have loyal advisors and an unbreakable bond with your dragon. That alone is enough to unnerve those who would oppose you. She stepped away from the parapet, heading back inside. We leave at first light. I want to tour the nearby villages and confirm the conditions for myself. Let Lord Roland see that I am a queen who walks among her people, not a distant tyrant. At dawn, Daenerys and her retinue rode out, accompanied by a handful of Baratheon knights. They traveled through winding roads, flanked by farmland that showed signs of slow recovery. Peasants paused in their labor, jaws slack at the sight of so many unsullied and a monstrous dragon in the sky. Daenerys dismounted in small hamlets, speaking directly to village elders about their needs. She listened intently to their woes: crop failures, bandits, high rents owed to distant lords. She offered assistance where she could, promising shipments of seed and the presence of soldiers to deter criminals. Seeing the queen herself among them stirred hope in the eyes of the small folk. Some knelt in gratitude, others simply stood in stunned silence. A few whispered prayers to the Seven for her success. A few gave thanks to the Lord of Light, presumably influenced by rumors from Essos. Daenerys offered them all gentle words, refusing the titles of deity they tried to bestow. And yet, each time she mounted her horse, she felt the burden of expectations settle back on her shoulders. Around midday, she stood on a low hill, gazing across fields of half-harvested wheat. Drogon landed with a mighty gust, flattening stalks in a wide circle. Peasants cowered, though some dared to watch in awe. Daenerys scratched Drogon's enormous jaw, feeling the rumble of his contentment. In that moment, she believed she could build a new Westeros without bathing it in flame. If the people recognized her strength and her mercy together, perhaps war could be averted. But she knew not all lords would bow. Ravens came bearing news. Certain houses in the Reach were aligning under a self-styled regent who questioned her claim. The High Septon in King's Landing had called a council urging the faithful to remain united under the Seven's grace. Whispers even told of mercenaries landing in the Vale, men hired to resist the Targaryen invasion. Slowly but surely, the chessboard of Westeros was set, with Daenerys and her unstoppable dragon on one side, uncertain alliances on the other. When Daenerys returned to Sungate late in the afternoon, she found Tyrion pacing the fortress courtyard, a raven scroll clutched in his hand. His expression was grim. "Bad news," he said. "A band of knights in the Crownlands, some old Lannister loyalists, apparently attacked one of our supply caravans. They put the wagons to the torch and killed or captured the men. They left a message: no false queen or foreign god will rule here." Daenerys felt a surge of anger. She recalled her vow to end needless bloodshed, but also her responsibility to protect those who served her. Where did this happen? Tyrion pointed to a spot on a rough map. "A few leagues north of here, near a crossing called the Ember Ford. They fled before our scouts arrived." She clenched her jaw. "Then we hunt them down and make an example. I won't let brigands terrorize the realm under the guise of loyalty to an old regime." Grey Worm arrived, saluting sharply. "The Unsullied stand ready. Shall we ride at once, your grace?" Daenerys hesitated, remembering her desire to avoid immediate violence. But this demanded a firm response. "Yes. We leave half our men here to guard Sungate with Lord Roland. The rest will ride with me. Send ravens to warn local lords that these bandits are out there." Within the hour, Daenerys was in the saddle again. Tyrion insisted on accompanying her, though he looked weary. Yora rode at her side, scanning the horizon. Grey Worm led a detachment of Unsullied, their spears glinting in the setting sun. Drogon soared low above them, casting a massive shadow across the rolling fields. Local peasants huddled in doorways or behind fences, uncertain whether to cheer or hide from the queen's vengeful pursuit. They rode hard for hours, guided by the reports of frightened survivors. Near dusk, they came upon the smoldering remains of the caravan. Wagons lay overturned, crates and barrels smashed. Bodies of men and horses littered the roadside. Daenerys dismounted, heart heavy with rage and sorrow. These were her people. She had promised them safety, and they had died for their loyalty. Tyrion knelt by a body, face grim. "Tracks lead east," Grey Worm said, stepping around the debris. "They can't be far." The sun sank below the horizon, staining the sky blood-red. Daenerys gazed at the carnage, then turned to her men with a hardened resolve. "We find them, tonight if possible. They will not escape justice." A scout returned within the hour, breathless. "They've made camp in a wooded glen, about 2 miles ahead. Perhaps 50 men, knights, and sellswords. They are carousing, drunk from stolen wine." Daenerys felt the old fire stir inside her, the kind she had tried to temper with mercy. But these men had murdered her people, left mocking messages. She looked to Tyrion, who studied her expression. "We could wait till dawn, approach them with demands of surrender," he offered carefully. She shook her head. "They've shown no respect for such niceties. There will be no more caravans burned, no more cowardly attacks." She swung onto Drogon's back, ignoring Tyrion's glance of hesitation. Drogon sensed her anger, letting out a thunderous roar that made the ground tremble. The Unsullied marched forward, spears at the ready. Yora and Grey Worm exchanged a wordless look, then took off at a gallop. Tyrion lagged a moment before riding after, muttering about how this might look to the onlooking lords. Daenerys urged Drogon into the sky, scanning the darkness for the wooded glen. Flickers of torchlight glimmered amid the trees, betraying the bandits' position. She circled overhead, hearing laughter and drunken shouts. They had no notion that a living fury circled above them. She guided Drogon lower. The men in the camp began to shout in alarm, some pointing upward, others scrambling for weapons. Firelight revealed their plate and mail, the battered sigils of old Lannister bannermen. Daenerys' heart pounded with a mixture of wrath and sorrow as she recalled all the devastation House Lannister had once caused in her life. No words could rectify this. They had slain innocents in her name. She leaned forward, letting the bond between her and Drogon speak for her. He opened his maw, revealing the inferno that churned within. A breath of flame erupted, scorching the camp below. Tents burst into conflagration. Men screamed as they dropped or ran, their armor clattering. Some managed to scramble onto horses, only to be met by unsullied spears at the clearing's edge. In the orange glow, Daenerys saw desperation and terror etched on their faces. Part of her wanted to show mercy, but as arrows clattered harmlessly off Drogon's scales as the memory of the dead caravanners filled her mind, she felt no pity. Another sweep of flame ended the fight swiftly. Within minutes, the camp was in ashes. Those who survived, perhaps half a dozen men, threw down their weapons, crawling on the scorched earth. The Unsullied bound them in chains, ignoring their pleas for mercy. Daenerys landed. The smell of charred flesh and burning wood stung her nostrils. She dismounted Drogon, who growled low as if still thirsty for vengeance. Tyrion arrived on horseback, surveying the scene with a grimace. "It's done then." She turned to the captured men. "Who commands you?" A knight with singed hair and a battered sigil coughed, eyes filled with terror. "No one commands us now. We heard you returned. Some said you were a demon or a goddess, and we refused to bow. We took coin from a Lannister cousin, told to harass your forces. Please, have mercy." Her anger flared again, but she forced it to remain cold. "You slaughtered innocent men. You forfeited mercy." She stepped aside to address Grey Worm. "Execute them all. Let it be known that I do not suffer butchers to roam free." The knight wailed, but the Unsullied showed no hesitation. Swords flashed. The survivors fell, their blood darkening the scorched ground. Tyrion closed his eyes briefly. When the deed was done, he turned to Daenerys. "I hope the realm sees this as justice, not cruelty." She swallowed hard, returning to Drogon's side. "They will see I protect my own. If the realm doubts my resolve, let them remember this night. I offer peace to those who accept it, and fire to those who murder in my name." They made camp just beyond the charred remnants of the bandits' lair. In the quiet aftermath, Daenerys stared into the flames of her own campfire, reflecting on how easy it was to slide back into the role of the Dragon Queen who inspired dread. She glanced at Drogon, curled around the periphery, his tail a dark coil in the dying light of the embers. He was unstoppable, and sometimes so was her wrath. By morning, they rode back to Sungate. Word of the swift retribution preceded them. Locals whispered of the dragon's fury, how no arrow or blade could scratch him. Some fell to their knees at the mere sight of Daenerys, uncertain if she was savior or vengeful deity. Lord Roland heard the tale with a pensive nod, likely relieved the bandits were gone, yet uneasy about the swiftness of her wrath. Tyrion, for his part, remained pointedly silent, though Daenerys could sense the thoughts roiling behind his eyes. That evening they gathered once more around the painted table. Tyrion read new letters from other lords, some praising her crackdown on bandits, others warning that such displays of dragonfire would only fuel fear. Daenerys listened, weighing the cost of fear against the necessity of protecting her people. She recalled how, in Essos, she had tried to avoid excessive violence, yet had sometimes resorted to it. The difference now was that she held an unimaginable advantage. A dragon bigger than any the world had seen, seemingly immune to all weapons. The burden of using or not using that advantage weighed on her soul. As the discussions wound down, Daenerys rose, placing her palms on the painted table. "We will continue forging alliances. Send out invitations to the lords of the Crownlands, the Reach, even the North if they are willing to speak. Let them see I bring stability, not ruin. If they raise arms against me, they know what awaits them." She hesitated, then looked at Tyrion, Yora, and Missandei. "I need your counsel to keep me from becoming the tyrant I have always feared. Remind me when I stray. I do not want to rule by terror alone." Yora inclined his head. "Always, Khaleesi." Tyrion's voice was gentle. "I will do my best to speak honestly, even when it's hard." Missandei offered a warm smile. "Your compassion is stronger than your anger, my queen. We will help you keep it so." Daenerys nodded, the faintest relief washing over her. She dismissed them for the night, yet sleep did not come easily. She paced the stone halls of Dragonstone, hearing the distant crash of waves and the rustle of banners in the wind. Visions flickered in her mind. Worshippers in Essos bowing to her effigy, the bandits burning beneath Drogon's flame, Lord Roland bending the knee. Each image reminded her of the paradox she inhabited. Revered as a living goddess, capable of boundless destruction, yet striving to be a just ruler. She ascended a winding stair to the highest rampart, the wind snatching at her hair. There, gazing across the moonlit sea, she found Drogon perched. He angled his massive head to regard her, glowing eyes reflecting starlight. She approached with measured steps, resting a hand on the warm scales of his flank. His deep rumble vibrated through her bones. The tide below surged against black rocks, filling the night with a steady roar. Daenerys wondered if the realm could ever truly unite under her. A queen the Red Priests claimed to be divine. With a dragon no mortal weapon could harm. If the Seven Kingdoms accepted her peacefully, she would rule with mercy. But if they challenged her, she feared the flames she could unleash. So long as Drogon remained unstoppable, the temptation to use him against any threat loomed, even as she fought to remain measured in her judgment. She closed her eyes, feeling the swirl of the wind, the brush of Drogon's scales. She remembered the words of her advisors, to balance justice and power, compassion and strength. Remembering the freedmen in Essos who revered her for giving them liberty, she tried to cling to that purpose. She would show Westeros that her rule was not built on cruelty, but on hope. And if she needed to unleash the dragon's flame again, she would do so only for the sake of the people she served. Drogon rumbled softly and she leaned into his warmth. For a moment, they stood there, a queen and her colossal dragon outlined against a moonlit sky. Whatever destiny the Red Priest saw in her, whatever tomorrow might bring, she would walk forward as Daenerys Targaryen, breaker of chains, queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and flame that would light a new path. Fear and adoration might follow in her wake, but she would hold tight to the compassion that kept her human, even as the world called her a goddess and her child soared above them, invulnerable as the hottest star in the night. Daenerys Targaryen stood upon the windswept ramparts of Dragonstone, her silver hair ruffling in the stiff breeze coming off the narrow sea. The moonlight cast a ghostly sheen across the basalt walls, reflecting faintly on Drogon's obsidian scales. He rested against the battlements like a living fortress, wings partially folded, his immense head turned to watch his mother with those volcanic eyes. She ran her fingers across the ridges of his flank, seeking a calm that had been elusive since her return to Westeros. Each day, fresh missives arrived, bearing both alliances and hostilities, tidings of bandit raids and petitions for aid. Each day, her legend spread. Some called her the Unburnt or Breaker of Chains, while others, thanks to the Red Priests, whispered of a living goddess whose dragon no sword or spear could wound. She gazed into the dark sea, recalling the day's events. She had spoken again with Lord Roland Baratheon, who seemed intent on proving himself a loyal vassal. He had pledged Storm's End's knights to assist with relief efforts in the Crownlands. News from other corners of Westeros trickled in by Raven. Some lords in the Reach remained wary, uncertain whether to yield or resist. The Crownlands proper, so close to King's Landing, were a jumble of smaller houses, some desperate for a strong ruler, others beholden to the High Septon and suspicious of foreign gods. Daenerys longed for a peaceful transition of power, but she was no fool. War hovered like a thundercloud on the horizon, and even an invulnerable dragon coup LD not prevent all bloodshed. Not if old grudges and fanatic zeal took root. She recalled how easily she had unleashed Drogon's flames upon those bandits at Emberford. The memory still stirred both satisfaction and shame. They had murdered her people, so she had chosen swift, merciless retribution. Yet every time she wielded Drogon's unstoppable fury, she risked living up to the darkest fears her enemies harbored, that she would become another tyrant, enthroned by fire. She exhaled in a soft sigh, letting the wind carry her breath into the night. Then, stepping away from the rampart's edge, she made her way down the stairs to the courtyard. At this hour, the courtyard lay in half-shadow. A few torches guttered in iron brackets, revealing unsullied patrolling in disciplined arcs. Dothraki horses stamped restlessly near the stable. Beyond the gates, Nightwind rustled tall grasses that stretched toward the sea. Daenerys approached a modestly lit chamber to find Tyrion, Missandei, and Yora gathered inside, huddled over several maps pinned to a heavy table. The painted table was in the adjacent hall, but they used the smaller room for detailed planning where they wouldn't be distracted by the grand scale of Westeros carved in wood. Tyrion looked up from the scribbled notes he clutched. "Your Grace," he said, inclining his head. "We have new messages. One from Lord Hightower in Old Town, one from the Warden of the North, if we can still call him that, and another from King's Landing. Or from the High Septon, at least." Daenerys moved to the table, her armor catching the torchlight. "Tell me," she said simply. Tyrion smoothed out a parchment. "Lord Hightower writes that he remains loyal to the peace of the realm above all. He doesn't openly pledge fealty, but he says Old Town will not shelter any who take arms against you, so long as you don't threaten the Citadel or the faith in his city. Essentially, he's hedging his bets. Perhaps waiting to see which way the wind blows." Daenerys nodded. "That might be the best we can hope for now. Old Town is a seat of great influence. At least they haven't sworn to oppose us." Tyrion set the parchment aside and took up the next. From the north, Lord Wyman Manderley sends a polite, albeit terse message. He says the north is rebuilding after years of hardship and will remain neutral unless threatened. They wish you no harm, but they won't bow easily after they fought so hard for independence. There's also mention that they're still uncertain who, if anyone, sits the Iron Throne in truth. Daenerys felt a tug of old memories, the wars in the north, the battles against the undead, and the alliances that had nearly formed. But those days had been chaotic, and she had left Westeros before the dust settled. "We can't force them to bend the knee yet," she said. "Our grip on the south is far from secure. Let the north be for the moment unless they move against us. If they prefer isolation, we'll respect that, so long as they don't harbor my enemies." Tyrion's eyes flickered in approval. He set aside that letter too, then took the third parchment. "This is from the High Septon in King's Landing. He writes in flowery prose about the sanctity of the faith, the importance of the Seven, the memory of King's Landing's near destruction in the past. And he more or less demands an audience to ensure you don't intend to stamp out the faith. He also requests, rather strongly, that you disavow the Red Priests who call you a living goddess." Daenerys met the eyes of her three closest advisors in turn. "We knew this would happen," she said softly. "I have no intention of allowing a religious war in my name, but neither will I spurn the priests who supported me in Essos. The faith of the Seven must learn that I welcome peaceful worship of any faith. I will not kneel to their commands, but nor will I attempt to destroy them." Missandei spoke up. "Should we arrange a meeting with the High Septon?" "We must," Daenerys said. "If I refuse, he'll whip up the devout in King's Landing. Turn them into an obstacle, maybe even an army of zealots. We have enough potential enemies already." Tyrion tapped the letter. The High Septon suggests meeting in King's Landing itself. I strongly advise against that. It's the seat of the Faith's power, and we have few allies inside the city walls. A more neutral ground would be safer. Daenerys nodded in agreement, then proposed that we meet near Rosby or Duskendale, some place in the Crownlands not too distant from the city, but under no illusions that we'll be at his mercy. If he refuses, let the realm see that he's the one blocking dialogue. Tyrion made a note. Done. Though expect quite the negotiation. He'll try to sow fear about this living goddess business. You'll have to tread carefully. Daenerys exhaled, half in frustration, half in acceptance. I will. We'll make it clear I do not claim to be a god. Even so, Yora pointed out in his measured voice, the Red Priests are proclaiming you as such. That's beyond your control. The High Septon will press you to denounce them outright. Daenerys shook her head, staring at the flickering flame of a torch. I'll say it as many times as I must. I do not compel worship. The Red Priests believed in me from the start, and they've done more good than harm. I won't condemn them for their faith, nor will I allow them to terrorize the Seven's followers. Tyrion studied her expression, then gave a tight nod. We'll find a balance, and in the meantime we continue building alliances with other lords who might come around. The Tyrell remnants in the Reach, for instance, have scattered. Some of them might see opportunity in your arrival. Daenerys recalled the once proud House Tyrell, destroyed by Cersei Lannister's schemes. If any Tyrells remain, we might offer them a path to restoration under my rule. I'll have you send a discreet envoy. They agreed to the plan. In the lantern's glow, Missandei began drafting the letters, her quill scratching softly over parchment. Yora and Tyrion conferred on which knights or freedmen might serve best as envoys. After an hour, the meeting concluded. Daenerys retreated to her chambers, aware of how tenuous her position was, how precariously she balanced faith, politics, and old feuds. She felt no immediate fear for her life. Drogon's unstoppable presence deterred assassins, but she feared a deeper threat. The possibility that all Westeros might unite against her if her new subjects believed she would tear down their temples and old traditions in the name of Lawler. Sleep came only in fitful stretches. Nightmares flickered across her thoughts, memories of the battle with the dead, of the twisted shape of King's Landing in flames. She awoke, heart-pounding, half remembering how she had once hovered on the brink of burning the city. In the quiet gloom, she reminded herself she was not that person anymore, not the queen who had been consumed by grief and rage. She'd learned from those mistakes, or so she hoped. At dawn, she rose and donned her riding leathers, stepping into the courtyard where Drogon sprawled like an ebony cliff. He lifted his head at her approach, releasing a low growl that was almost a greeting. The sky was pale and streaked with clouds. Unsullied moved through drill formations, their spears clacking in rhythm. Dothraki saddled horses eager to ride patrols. Beyond the walls, the sea shimmered and gulls wheeled overhead. She climbed onto Drogon's back with practiced ease. The dragon rose, wings scraping the air in mighty beats that stirred dust devils across the yard. Guards and courtiers shielded their eyes. Daenerys felt the now familiar rush of adrenaline and exultation as Drogon lifted her higher and higher, the wind chilling her cheeks. They soared over Dragonstone's towers and out across the churning sea. For a long while, she let him fly without direction, gliding on air currents, banking gently above the waves. The immensity of Drogon never ceased to awe her. She'd known him as a hatchling no bigger than a cat. Now his wingspan cast a shadow that nearly covered the fort below. His hide had become an impenetrable fortress. Even the scars of old battles had vanished, replaced by stronger scales. She thought again of Balerion the Black Dread, the monstrous dragon her ancestors used to conquer these very lands. Drogon might surpass even that legend, now an embodiment of unstoppable might. At length, she guided him inland, coasting over rolling hills and farmland that ringed the coast. She spotted peasants in fields, some kneeling in shock or running to gather children under thatch roofs as the shadow of the giant dragon swept over them. She hoped that in time they would see this as a sign of protection, not a threat. But fear was easier to stoke than trust. They landed near a small village where she'd already sent relief wagons. Word had reached her that the supplies arrived and were being distributed. Daenerys wanted to see it herself. As Drogon touched down in a fallow field, villagers dropped their tasks and gawked. Only a few dared approach, and those trembled as they bowed. Daenerys slid from Drogon's back, lifting her hands in a gesture of reassurance. "It's all right," she called, her voice carrying over the hush. "I've brought help. You don't need to fear me or my dragon." A half-dozen people in rough-spun clothing inched closer. One, an older woman with gray hair pulled back in a kerchief, spoke haltingly. "Begging your pardon, your grace, we heard you sent grain and salt fish. And a few men with spears have come to guard us from bandits. We're grateful, but we feared you might burn us if we didn't show you respect." Daenerys' heart twisted. "No," she said more softly. "No one is to be burned for failing to kneel. My soldiers are here to protect you, not harm you. Tell me, is the food enough? And have the bandits troubled you?" The woman exchanged a look with a younger man at her side, perhaps her son. "The bandits ran off when the soldiers showed up. We have enough to see us through the next fortnight, maybe more if we're careful. It's more than we had last winter." She glanced at Drogon, who lay curled behind Daenerys like a mountain of living onyx, snorting gently. You'll not demand offerings? Like the old stories say dragons require." Daenerys shook her head, stepping closer. "I only ask for your goodwill, your loyalty to a realm that protects you from harm. If you farm your land and pay fair taxes, that is all. No one will punish you for living your life." A sense of relief seemed to wash over them. Some of the villagers even dared to offer timid smiles. The older woman sank into a deeper bow. "Then we are in your debt, your grace." I see you mean what you say. Thank you." Daenerys placed a hand gently on the woman's shoulder, helping her stand upright. "You owe me no more kneeling. Rise. I do this because it's my duty as queen. May your harvest be plentiful." She spent a short while speaking with a few others, listening to their concerns. Many had lost family in the wars, some had endured pillaging by rogue soldiers, and nearly all were fearful of what a new conflict might bring. Daenerys tried to reassure them that peace was her goal, though she couldn't promise no battles would erupt. They accepted her words with cautious hope. When she departed, climbing onto Drogon's back once more, she caught sight of children waving from the edge of the field. She waved back. She hoped that in their memories this day would remain, a queen who came not as a terror but as a benevolent guardian, even if her dragon appeared the stuff of nightmares. The flight back to Dragonstone took her across more farmland, over scattered woodlands, and past the coastline's rugged cliffs. Spotting the fortress again, its twisted towers carved with stone dragons, she guided Drogon downward. In the courtyard, guards parted swiftly, giving the dragon enough space to land without flattening them. As Daenerys dismounted, Tyrion hurried over, parchment in hand. Yora followed behind him. Tyrion caught his breath, then announced, "Your Grace, we've had a response from the High Septon. He accepts the idea of meeting near Duskendale. He requests it happen within a fortnight. Also, a raven from the Vale, Lord Grafton of Gulltown, offers you safe harbor for any of your ships, if you desire. He claims loyalty to no one, but he's open to trade." Another sign that some are hedging their bets. Daenerys passed a hand over her brow, wiping away a sheen of sweat from the flight. "Good. At least the High Septon is willing to talk on neutral ground. We'll need to prepare. Perhaps we can extend an invitation to other lords who remain unsure." Yora folded his arms. "Might be wise to bring some show of force, but not so much that it provokes fear of an ambush." Tyrion's mouth twisted. "Yes, that's the dance we have to dance. Bring enough soldiers to keep you safe, but not so many as to suggest you mean to arrest or burn the High Septon. And Drogon." Daenerys' gaze shifted to her dragon, who had begun picking at a goat carcass that some stable hand had left for him. "He goes wherever I go, but I can let him circle from a distance. I don't want the negotiations overshadowed by terror. Yet, if there is any sign of treachery, I'll have him land." Tyrion gave a slight nod, though he clearly had misgivings about how any meeting might unfold when a beast of Drogon's size roamed the skies overhead. "We'll craft a plan." In the days leading up to the arranged meeting, Daenerys busied herself with more local concerns. She made certain that caravans of food continued to roll out to stricken villages, and she met with envoys from lords around the Crownlands. Some arrived with cautious courtesy, leaving with promises of future collaboration and an uneasy acceptance that House Targaryen was returning to power. Others rejected her summons or sent scribes with half-hearted pledges that meant little. Late one afternoon, while Daenerys was conferring with Missandei and Grey Worm about Dothraki patrol routes, a young messenger from House Rosby rode into the courtyard. He knelt hastily, stammering about an upsurge of banditry near Rosby's borders. "They wear old Lannister tabards," he said, voice quavering. "They won't yield to Rosby's men, and they threaten to raze the villages if Rosby supports you. They say the realm must remain free of the Dragon Witch." Daenerys pressed her lips together. "We can't allow these roving warbands to spread terror. The local lords are sometimes too weak or too timid to handle them. This is the second group in a month claiming allegiance to old Lannister ties. Tyrion, do you know who might be leading these sorts of men?" Tyrion, who had just entered the hall, looked troubled. "Many of my father's former bannermen scattered when the wars ended. Some harbor grudges. Some just want chaos. They use Lannister colors to frighten peasants. But no true Lannister is backing them as far as I know. The main line is gone. These might be remnants of lesser branches or hedge knights seeking coin by stoking fear." Daenerys turned to Grey Worm. "Send a detachment of Unsullied. I'll have them coordinate with Rosby's men. Let's end this before more blood is spilled." He saluted sharply. "At once, Your Grace." The messenger stuttered his thanks, then hurried out to lead the Unsullied to the troubled area. Daenerys watched him go, feeling anew the weight of every petty conflict she had to resolve. Westeros was riddled with cracks, each one needing attention, and she had only begun the work of reuniting these lands. With a sigh, she summoned Jorah and prepared to set out for Duskendale, where the meeting with the High Septon was to take place. They would travel in 3 days, a measured pace that allowed for security measures. On the morning of departure, the weather turned blustery. Clouds scudded across a gray sky as Daenerys donned her traveling leathers and light armor. The courtyard was a bustle of activity as the Unsullied formed ranks. The Dothraki checked their horses and supply wagons were loaded for the journey. Tyrion wore a heavy cloak against the chill, occasionally muttering about ill omens in the wind. Missandei oversaw the final rosters while Jorah consulted with Grey Worm about route security. Daenerys mounted her silver mare, letting Drogon follow overhead. The wind whipped at her hair, heightening her sense of unease. They crossed the land bridge from Dragonstone and wound their way through the Crownlands. The fields were dotted with the last gleanings of harvest. The small folk, accustomed now to sightings of Daenerys's forces, often paused to watch the column pass, some bowing, some staring in mute awe. Overhead, Drogon's silhouette intermittently vanished behind low-lying clouds, reappearing with a roar that rattled windows in distant farmhouses. They camped after a long day's ride near a small river, using a patch of woodland as shelter from the gusting winds. A drizzle set in by twilight, pattering on tents and turning the ground to slick mud. Daenerys dined on salted meat and crusty bread beneath a large canopy. Tyrion, Jorah, Missandei, and a few Unsullied captains gathered around a low-burning brazier for warmth. Tyrion's mood was somber as he sipped watered wine. The High Septon must know how vulnerable King's Landing is right now. There's no cohesive royal guard to speak of, only the faith militant, though it's not what it was. If he tries to proclaim some holy war, the city could become a powder keg. Daenerys nodded, her gaze fixed on the glowing coals. "I plan to reassure him that I won't replace the faith with red priests or force conversions. But if he demands I renounce the Red Temple entirely, that's not an option. I can't betray those who supported me for so long." Jorah threw a small branch into the brazier. Sparks hissed upward. "You might compromise. Promise them that the Red Priests won't build more temples without permission. Or some statement that you respect the faith's authority within its own houses of worship." Tyrion raised a brow. "He may also demand you forbid them to call you a goddess. They fear idolatry above all." Daenerys laughed bitterly. "As though I can command the Red Priests to stop believing their prophecies. I've said time and again I'm no god. But to them I am the living flame. The devout rarely heed reason." Missandei's voice was gentler. "Perhaps if you speak with Kinvara, explain that open defiance of the Seven could spark violence, she might moderate their teachings in Westeros. At least publicly." Daenerys forced a faint smile. "I left Kinvara behind in Dragonstone for precisely this reason, so she wouldn't stoke the High Septon's fears. But she'll only go so far to restrain herself. She believes wholeheartedly that I fulfill her lord's prophecies." Tyrion sighed. "Then let's hope the High Septon is more politician than fanatic. If he's a fanatic, these talks could fail before they begin." The wind outside the canopy picked up, causing the tents to flap and the brazier's flames to dance crazily. Daenerys listened to the rustle of the trees, the patter of rain on leaves, and the distant rumble from Drogon's perch. She rubbed her arms to ward off the chill. "We'll proceed carefully," she said. "The next days will be crucial. A single misstep could turn half the realm against me." At dawn, the rain had eased to a misty drizzle. They pressed on, the muddy roads slowing the wagons. Drogon soared overhead, occasionally disappearing into sheets of low cloud. Despite the weather, Daenerys felt a flicker of hope. The countryside seemed calmer than it had been. And a fortnight ago, perhaps her relief efforts had eased the tensions. She glimpsed fewer frightened faces and more watchful curiosity. On the afternoon of the second day, they reached the outskirts of Duskendale, a town perched along the northern coast of Blackwater Bay. The old keep known as the Dun Fort rose on a rocky rise, battered by centuries of storms. According to the arrangement, the parley with the High Septon would occur in a large field outside the town walls, minimizing the chance for entrapment on either side. Daenerys' host made camp on a gentle slope overlooking that field. From her vantage, she saw a separate encampment of robed faithful with a scattering of wagons and carts. White-robed figures bustled about, and she glimpsed the sun reflecting off metal, likely the weapons of the Faith Militant. The High Septon's retinue. A half-ruined windmill nearby offered partial shelter from the breeze that swept in off the bay. Grey Worm, astride a horse, rode up to her. "We have posted sentinels around the perimeter," he said. "No sign of hidden armies. They appear to number around 300. Mostly priests, a few armed faithful." Daenerys inclined her head. "We'll keep watch through the night. Tomorrow, I'll meet the High Septon in the center of that field, as agreed. I'll bring only a small retinue." Tyrion, catching up on foot, puffed a little from the climb. "I'd recommend you ride Drogon overhead even if he doesn't land. Remind them you're not defenseless." Daenerys eyed the other encampment, gauging how the faithful might react to a monstrous dragon looming overhead. "I'll consider it. I want them to see I'm not here to burn them to ash at the slightest offense. But nor am I at their mercy." They set their camp with methodical efficiency. The Unsullied erected tents in neat rows. The Dothraki staked their horses near a copse of trees. Patrols were assigned to discourage any infiltration attempts. As twilight approached, Daenerys shared a meager meal of roasted fowl with Tyrion and Yora, mindful that overeager feasting might look indulgent when the realm remained battered by famine in places. Night fell, bringing a clear sky streaked with stars. Daenerys stood at the edge of camp, cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. She watched faint lights flicker in the other camp, hearing distant chanting, perhaps a devotional or nightly prayer to the Seven. She wondered if they prayed for her downfall, or if they prayed for guidance on how to handle a queen of dragons and the rumored goddess of fire. She retired to her tent, though she slept fitfully. Dreams fluttered in her mind, images of scorched battlefields, of temple fires in Essos, and of her father's old madness whispered through generations. She woke twice in a cold sweat, each time calming herself by remembering the calmer expressions she had seen on villagers' faces. Not all who looked upon her saw a monster. She had to cling to that. When dawn arrived, bright and chilly, Daenerys rose. She dressed in black and silver garb that conveyed dignity without overtly flaunting wealth. A small circle of advisors convened outside her tent. Tyrion, wearing a fine but understated tunic, gave a final rundown of the day's plan. The High Septon would approach under a banner of truce, accompanied by a handful of Faith Militant. Daenerys would meet him with an equal number of escorts. No more than 20 on either side. The meeting spot was a broad, flat area near the ruined windmill. "Drogon?" Yora asked quietly, eyes flicking upward as though searching the gray sky. Daenerys let out a slow breath. "He'll be in the air, high enough not to overshadow the meeting, but ready if there's trouble. I want these priests to know I trust them, but not so much that I'll be caught unaware." Grey Worm saluted, pulling back the tent flap to reveal the day's brightness. "We're ready, Your Grace." She mounted her silver mare, flanked by Tyrion, Missandei, Yora, Grey Worm, and 15 Unsullied on foot. Their armor gleamed in the angled sunlight. The rest of her forces remained at a distance, forming a cautious ring around the field. On the opposing side, she saw a cluster of white-robed faithful approaching. A tall man with a golden crystal pendant glinting at his chest walked at the forefront, the High Septon, presumably. He was flanked by a handful of Septons and Septas, plus a dozen armed men wearing the seven-pointed star upon their cloaks or tabards. Faith Militant, their pikes held at an upright rest. As Daenerys advanced, a hush seemed to fall over the entire field. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the distant crash of waves from the bay. Overhead, Drogon soared in broad circles, a majestic shadow sliding across the grass. She kept her mare steady, refusing to show any nerves. This was a test of her diplomacy, her intent, and the realm's future acceptance. They halted a respectful distance from each other. Daenerys dismounted gracefully. The High Septon offered a formal bow, though his expression was tinged with wariness. He was a gaunt man in his late 50s, bald save for a fringe of white hair, his eyes sunken and sharp. The crystal pendant around his neck caught the morning sun, scattering rainbow shards on his robes. "Your Grace," the High Septon intoned. "I am High Septon Norbert. On behalf of the holy faith of the Seven, I greet you." Daenerys inclined her head. "High Septon, I appreciate that you agreed to this meeting. My hope is to avoid needless conflict between the faith and my rule." He pressed his hands together in front of his chest as though in prayer. "That is my hope as well. The realm has suffered too long from wars and strife. Yet the faithful of Westeros look to me for guidance, and I must address the concerns they voice." "Of course," Daenerys said softly. "Speak plainly so we can find common ground." He regarded her a moment, perhaps gauging the sincerity in her eyes. Then he cast a glance skyward at Drogon's distant silhouette. "Then let us begin with the matter most pressing to the faith. There are disturbing reports of red priests proclaiming you a living goddess. The Seven's faithful do not worship living mortal beings, especially not ones who bring new creeds to our shores. Many fear you plan to supplant the Seven with this foreign Lord of Light. Should they not worry?" Daenerys took a breath. "They should not. I have no intention of eradicating the Seven. I believe each person has the right to worship freely, provided they do not harm others. That includes your faith as well as the Red Temple." The High Septon's lips pressed into a thin line. "That is a tolerant stance. Yet tolerance can be a slippery slope. The Red Priests claim your dragon is unstoppable and that you yourself are chosen by their god. In the hearts of many devout Westerosi, this sounds like blasphemy and a threat." "I can't control what others believe," Daenerys replied evenly. "I only control my own actions. I do not claim to be a god. I bleed, I feel pain, I struggle with decisions like any mortal ruler. But the Red Priests see me as a sign of their prophecies. I won't punish them for that, nor will I force you to accept it." Norbert's eyes flickered with something between skepticism and grudging respect. "A generous stance, but some among our faithful fear that the Red Temple's expansion will overshadow the Seven in your new reign. We hear rumors of flame-lit processions, talk of forging a new realm in fire." Daenerys let her gaze sweep across the armed faith militant. "I've also heard rumors that your adherents speak of me as a foreign usurper unfit to rule a land of the Seven. That they vow to cleanse me with holy judgment. Rumors abound on both sides. I'm here to ensure rumor doesn't breed violence. I don't want the small folk suffering another war of faith." The High Septon nodded slowly. "Neither do we. The faith has lost too many souls to the ravages of war. We seek peace, but peace rests upon certain assurances. First and foremost, that you will not sanction the destruction of septs or shrines, nor coerce our believers into worshipping your red god." Daenerys inclined her head. "That I can swear? Any sept, any shrine of the Seven shall remain safe under my reign, so long as it does not house rebels who shed innocent blood. I do not force conversions, nor do I condone punishing worshippers of the Seven. If any Red Priest attempts to do so, I'll stop them." A ripple of measured relief passed among the Septons in Norbert's entourage. The High Septon exhaled, his voice growing more confident. "That is fair, your grace. In turn, the faith will not incite the people against you. We will not command them to resist your rule, provided you do not subvert ours. We only ask that you affirm publicly your respect for the Seven, and that you deny any claims of your supposed divinity." Daenerys suppressed a small, bitter laugh. It was precisely the demand Tyrion had predicted. "I will publicly say I am no goddess. I've said so before, and I'll say it again. As for affirming my respect for the Seven, so long as the Seven's faithful do not undermine the peace, I give them my respect. But I will not abandon or condemn the Red Temple that aided me. Will you accept that balance?" There was a long silence, broken only by the wind rustling the grass and the distant cry of a gull. Finally, the High Septon gave a single, measured nod. "If the Red Temple keeps to itself, does not incite violence, and does not claim authority over the faith's domains, we can endure it. We have lived alongside the drowned men of the Iron Islands, the old gods of the North. In time, we might even find a modus vivendi with the Lord of Light's priests." Daenerys relaxed slightly. "Then let us pledge that. Mutual tolerance, no forced worship, no incitement to violence on either side. We both wish to serve the people of Westeros, do we not?" Norbert lifted his hands in a gesture akin to blessing. "If your reign helps the people find stability, feeds the hungry, and keeps the peace, we shall not stand in your way. The Seven teach compassion and justice, after all. There will be those among the faithful who resent you. But if your rule is as just as you claim, hearts may soften in time." Daenerys inclined her head. Then we have an accord, High Septon. A flicker of relief crossed his face. He opened his arms, and a younger Septon stepped forward, producing a scroll. I've had a brief statement prepared, something we can both sign, or at least put our seals to, affirming this arrangement. It's not quite a formal treaty, but a declaration of mutual understanding. Daenerys glanced at Tyrion, who gave a nod of agreement. Yora watched warily, but did not protest. Missandei stepped forward to examine the scroll. After a moment of scanning it, she murmured to Daenerys, "It states that you, Daenerys Targaryen, pledge not to suppress the faith of the Seven nor forcibly impose the worship of R'hllor, and that the faith, in turn, pledges not to condemn your claim to the throne on religious grounds. It also requests you publicly disclaim any divine status." Daenerys took the quill offered, dipping it in ink. She signed her name in a careful hand. The High Septon added his signature and seal. A subtle sense of relief, tinged with weariness, coursed through her. One potential flashpoint for civil war had been defused, for now. Norbert offered a faint smile. "I thank you, Your Grace. May the Seven guide your rule with wisdom and mercy. I pray we never again see the day when dragons lay waste to King's Landing." A memory stabbed at Daenerys. The horrifying glimpses of what might have been if she had once more lost control. She forced a composed nod. "Nor do I ever wish to see the city burn. Let us walk the path of peace." They parted ways, each side returning to their respective encampments. Tyrion exhaled as they rode back. "You handled that well. No one was burned, no one stormed away. For now, you've secured a truce with the faith. That's a major victory. Many lords in the Crownlands might follow the faith's lead." Daenerys studied the freshly signed scroll, now rolled up and stashed in Missandei's satchel. "I only hope the faith adherents across the realm listen to him. Fanatics rarely heed compromise." Yora steered his horse closer. "We must keep vigilant, of course. But at least there won't be a blanket condemnation of you from every pulpit in the Seven Kingdoms. That's a relief indeed." Back at camp, Daenerys summoned Grey Worm and the Unsullied captains to update them on the negotiations. The field was still windy, though a patch of clear sky had opened overhead, revealing the bright midday sun. Drogon glided down from his high vantage and landed near the tents, letting out a low rumble as if asking Daenerys if all was well. She gently patted his flank, murmuring a reassurance. Later, after the midday meal, the High Septon's retinue departed for King's Landing, bearing the freshly inked declaration. Daenerys and her advisors stayed one more night near Duskendale. They planned to ride out at dawn, visiting a few local lords who had asked for an audience. That evening, the atmosphere in the Targaryen camp was lighter, the soldiers chatting and laughing around cookfires, heartened that they would not be fighting a zealots' war so soon. Daenerys shared a simple meal with Tyrion, Yora, Missandei, and Grey Worm by a large fire. The talk drifted to next steps, forging alliances with the Lords of the Reach, contacting Dorne, ensuring the newly formed freedmen councils in Essos were stable. Daenerys realized how far her reach was now, across the sea and the entire southern half of Westeros. Felt daunting, but she reminded herself that she had survived worse trials. "I received a raven from Volantis this morning," Missandei mentioned. "They report that the freed cities remain largely peaceful. Some news of a new red temple being built in Pentos, dedicated to you, but the local rulers are ignoring it as long as it stays within certain boundaries." Daenerys pressed her lips together. "Pentos, that was where my journey in Essos began with Viserys. Feels like a lifetime ago. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever see it again, or if my path is here now." Tyrion poured a bit of ale into a wooden cup. "Perhaps you'll visit as the undisputed queen of 2 continents, revered by many and tolerated by others." He smirked wryly. "Or, at least, as a formidable presence they dare not cross." Daenerys smiled faintly, though she quickly sobered. "We must keep forging a realm that can function without constant war. I'm weary of it. I suspect most small folk feel the same." Grey Worm's voice was soft but certain. "The Unsullied have fought for you, freed cities for you. We will stand as your shield in Westeros as well." Anyone who tries to raise arms will fail. She nodded in gratitude. Thank you, Grey Worm. But let's pray we won't need your spears often. Night settled in and Daenerys withdrew to her tent. She lay awake for a while, the wind rattling the canvas overhead. The High Septon's written pledge felt like a step toward acceptance, but doubt gnawed at her. Other powers might not be so amenable. The North remained aloof, the Vale uncertain, parts of the Reach in flux. The faint threat of mercenary companies or foreign gold still lingered. And the rumor of her being a goddess, unstoppable as her dragon, could incite men to desperate extremes. She rose before dawn, restless. Stepping outside, she found the camp still quiet. The sky above was star-flecked, a thin crescent moon hanging low on the horizon. A single torch guttered near the command tent, revealing Yora, who was apparently also unable to sleep. He approached, concern etched on his face. "Khaleesi," he said softly. "You're up early." She offered a tired smile. "I couldn't sleep. My thoughts won't settle." "You." He shook his head. "I keep thinking about how precarious this all is. But I also have faith in you. We've come so far." Daenerys nodded, letting the silence stretch. The wind carried the faint brine of the sea. "Thank you for believing in me all these years, Yora. I may not say it often, but I appreciate your counsel." He bowed his head in acknowledgement. "I serve as always." When the dawn broke, she rallied her party and set out. Tyrion and Missandei stayed behind with most of the camp to oversee the departure. Daenerys, Yora, Grey Worm, and a small escort rode deeper into Duskendale territory to call upon a local lord who had signaled an interest in her rule. The arrangement was straightforward. They would spend half a day parleying, then return to camp. Riding between rolling hills dotted with hedgerows, Daenerys inhaled the crisp morning air, hoping for a pleasant exchange. She spotted Drogon overhead, drifting lazily. Grey Worm led the vanguard and the rest formed a neat column behind her. The sun had just cleared the eastern horizon when they rounded a bend near a stream lined with willow trees. In that instant, a sudden volley of arrows whistled through the air, launched from a concealed position among the willows. They struck the ground and shields of the Unsullied with harsh thuds. One arrow brushed past Daenerys' mare, causing the animal to rear in alarm. She clutched the reins, cursing, her heart jolting with adrenaline. More arrows flew. One Unsullied soldier fell, an arrow piercing the gap in his armor at the neck. Grey Worm shouted an order, and the Unsullied formed a shield wall. Yora kicked his horse, drawing his sword. Daenerys tried to keep her mare under control, scanning the tree-line. There are figures in mismatched armor, some wearing partial Lannister garb, others sporting nothing but leathers and red cloth. Another group of bandits or assassins using Lannister colors to sow confusion. Another volley launched. The Unsullied raised shields, but a few men were struck. Daenerys' blood roared in her ears. She saw a cluster of archers shifting behind the willow trunks, preparing a third volley. With a snap decision, she signaled to Yora. "Protect the men. I'll call Drogon." She spurred her horse away from the thickest part of the ambush, searching the skies. Drogon soared above, already sensing her alarm. She raised her arm, beckoning, praying he could see. He roared in reply, tilting into a steep dive. Arrows peppered the ground around the Unsullied. One mount collapsed, screaming, flinging its rider into the mud. The hidden attackers, seeing Drogon's massive shape descend, scrambled in panic, some loosing desperate shots skyward. Within moments, Drogon's shadow eclipsed the clearing. He unleashed a withering stream of fire. Tree branches, thick with autumn leaves, exploded into flame. Archers shrieked, scattering. Daenerys guided her horse clear of the inferno. Grey Worm and the Unsullied advanced in disciplined fashion, spears at the ready. One attacker, face contorted with hatred, lunged from behind a burning willow. He brandished a spear at Daenerys' mare. Before he could thrust, Yora barreled in, sword flashing. Their blades clashed, and Yora parried the spear aside, delivering a decisive cut that dropped the assailant. Another arrow zipped past Daenerys, missing by inches. Drogon soared overhead, releasing a second torrent of flame that consumed the remaining archers. The battle ended in heartbeats. Few could stand against a dragon's wrath. Smoke billowed from the scorched willows, filling the air with an acrid stench. Daenerys swung off her trembling mare, scanning for wounded among her ranks. 2 Unsullied lay dead, and a handful more were wounded by arrows. The attackers lay scattered, either charred or cut down by the Unsullied. Grey Worm wiped sweat from his brow. "They aimed for you, your grace." The arrows came in a focused volley. Daenerys' heart still pounded. She knelt by one of the fallen attackers, hooking a finger under his half-burnt tunic. She found a scrap of cloth with a poorly embroidered lion's head, clearly not an official Lannister sigil. Another false banner. She recalled the unending string of outlaws and brigands trying to test her. Fools, she muttered, sorrow wrestling with anger in her voice. They knew they couldn't kill Drogon. Perhaps they hoped to kill me before he intervened. Yora approached, wiping blood from his sword. Are you hurt? She shook her head. No, but 2 more of my men are dead. They died protecting me from a worthless ambush. This realm bleeds from 1,000 cuts left over from old loyalties, old grudges. Grey Worm ordered the survivors, if any remained, to be rounded up. They found 1 man, badly burned and half-conscious, moaning in pain at the edge of the charred zone. And Unsullied dragged him forward where he collapsed at Daenerys' feet. Through scorched lips, he hissed curses. You, demon queen, you can't be killed, but we tried, had to, for the rightful heirs. Daenerys' eyes narrowed. What rightful heirs? The man coughed blood. Anyone but you, goddess, false queen, you bring the red god. I'd rather burn than bow, the Lannisters, the faith, they'll all stand against. He coughed again, his breath rattling. He died seconds later. A bitter taste filled Daenerys' mouth. Another fanatic or mercenary or some combination of both. She stood, summoning what composure she could. Grey Worm, see to our wounded. Burn the dead. We'll continue to that Lord's Keep, though I suspect we should proceed with caution. Yora glanced at the smoldering trees, face grim. Every time these brigands strike, they sow terror among the small folk. They want to prove you can't protect them from ambush, from murder. They spread fear and then claim you must be toppled. Daenerys felt a surge of fury at the needless death, the endless fragmentation. Then we must show them we will not be deterred. That we continue forward, that we punish those who kill innocents. She looked at Drogon, who settled heavily on scorched ground. No arrow or blade had touched him, but that was never in doubt. It was she who'd nearly been taken by surprise. If her horse had spooked differently, if an arrow had flown a hand's breadth to the side. She pushed the thought away, refusing to let fear paralyze her. Gather up the men. We'll ride on. If we can still salvage that audience, we will. I won't cower from a handful of outlaws. Within the hour, they set off again, leaving behind a somber scene of smoke and charred remains. 2 of their own dead were laid across horses, to be given proper rites later. Daenerys clutched the reins with a tight grip, scanning every treeline, every rise of the land. Drogon took wing, circling in broad arcs overhead, an ever-watchful sentinel. The possibility of further ambush weighed on them, but no new threat emerged. Perhaps the would-be assassins had staked everything on that single surprise attack. They arrived at the modest keep of Lord Cavan, a minor noble who had written of his willingness to pledge loyalty. Though the keep was small, it had intact walls and a wooden gatehouse. The sight of Daenerys' retinue approaching, with Drogon gliding overhead, caused the local guards to tremble. But Lord Cavan himself, a balding man of about 50, hurried out to greet them, voice trembling with both fear and excitement. Your Grace, he said, bowing deeply. I heard you had an attack upon the road. My men saw the smoke. We feared the worst. Daenerys dismounted, feeling the tension still in her shoulders. Yes, an ambush. Disgruntled remnants claiming Lannister ties. We dealt with them, but lost good men. Lord Cavan's face fell. My condolences, Your Grace. This land is rife with such bandits. They've raided my fields, threatened my tenants. I prayed you might bring order. Daenerys mustered a firm nod. That is my intention. And you wrote, offering to pledge fealty if I would in turn protect your lands. I'm here to confirm that bond. Does it still stand? He bowed again, a gesture so low his forehead nearly touched the ground. It does, Your Grace. With all my heart. I've prepared a letter of fealty. My keep and modest levy of men are yours to command. Only help us keep the roads safe so we can harvest and trade in peace. Daenerys helped him rise. Thank you. I accept your fealty. I will station a small detachment of Unsullied in your region under your guidance to root out any bandits that threaten your people. In return, you uphold my laws, including the ban on slavery, and gather fair taxes for the realm's reconstruction. Lord Cavan's eyes glistened in relief. Yes, absolutely. The ban on slavery, why, we never had slaves in any case. And we will do our utmost to pay taxes fairly. You have my word. Daenerys' anger over the ambush eased slightly. She saw in this man the kind of local lord who simply wanted stability. If enough men like him joined her cause, she could crush the scattered brigands who stirred chaos. She spent the afternoon discussing local issues with Cavan, all the while mindful of her lost soldiers. Yora ensured additional patrols were arranged and Grey Worm scouted the immediate vicinity. Drogon roosted in a meadow beyond the walls, stirring fear and curiosity among the keep's smallfolk. By sundown, Daenerys had formally sealed Lord Cavan's pledge. She and her escort then returned toward the main camp near Duskendale, traveling more cautiously in case of another ambush. Night draped the land by the time they arrived, but no further attacks occurred. Tyrion and Missandei met them at the camp's edge, faces drawn with worry. "We saw smoke in the morning," Tyrion said, stepping forward. "Were you?" Daenerys slid from the saddle, wincing at the memory. "An ambush. 2 unsullied killed, a few wounded. None of the attackers survived." Tyrion's jaw tightened. "They grow bolder, but if they keep failing, perhaps they'll run out of fools. I'm sorry about our losses." Daenerys exhaled slowly. "So am I. But let's not linger in these open fields too long. We'll march back to Dragonstone tomorrow. I want to consolidate our forces and plan a systematic cleanup of these brigands." That night, Daenerys lay awake once more, tormented by the knowledge that any stray arrow might have ended her life that morning. If Drogon had not been so near, if the Unsullied had been slower to shield her, everything she'd worked for could have crumbled in an instant. Strangely enough, the knowledge that she was indeed mortal, that she could bleed and die, brought her a sense of grounding. The Red Priests might hail her as a divine flame, but an arrow could still find its mark. Drogon might be unstoppable, but she was not. When dawn broke, the camp stirred in a subdued fashion. The men who had lost companions prepared the bodies for transport, so they could be buried with honor. Daenerys ordered a moment of silence, and some of the Dothraki joined the Unsullied in a solemn farewell. She mounted her mare with a heavier heart, scanning the gray sky for Drogon, who soared in slow circles above. His presence reminded her that, for all her vulnerabilities, she had a terrifying advantage. She only hoped she wouldn't need to unleash it further before the realm learned that her mercy was equally powerful. The journey back to Dragonstone took 2 days. They saw no further ambushes, though occasional glimpses of riders on distant hilltops suggested watchers still lingered. Tyrion used the travel time to refine plans for contacting other local lords, while Yora and Grey Worm updated strategies for scouting and securing the roads. Missandei drafted a message for Lord Roland Baratheon, informing him of the success in negotiating with the Faith, but also warning him that brigands persisted in the Crownlands. Upon reaching the Black Castle of Dragonstone, Daenerys felt a tinge of relief. The fortress's basalt walls and carved dragons seemed to greet her with stoic familiarity. She dismounted in the courtyard, letting stable hands tend to her weary mare. Drogon circled overhead, bellowing a cry that echoed off the stony cliffs before he settled heavily on the topmost parapet, sending crows flapping in alarm. Kinvara was waiting for her near the steps leading into the great hall, red robes swirling around her ankles. She inclined her head deeply, though her face bore the fervent warmth Daenerys had come to expect. "Your Grace, we have prayed night and day for your safe return." Daenerys gave a polite nod, though part of her braced for whatever the priestess might say next. "Thank you, Kinvara. The journey was eventful. The High Septon and I have reached an understanding for now." Kinvara's eyes gleamed. "I saw in the flames that you would triumph over the old ways, yet I also see shadows flickering at the edges of your bright flame. You must be vigilant, for envy and fear walk hand in hand among the great houses." Daenerys, exhausted, offered a tired smile. "Tell me something I don't know, priestess. But yes, I am aware. The faithful may accept me, but the realm is not yet united." Kinvara bowed her head. "If you desire the counsel of the Lord of Light's servants, we stand ready. We can quell doubt among the small folk, show them the dawn you represent." Daenerys paused, remembering the vow she'd made to the High Septon. "I don't want you waging war on the Seven in my name. We have an accord of tolerance. Respect that. Spread your message peacefully, if at all." The priestess placed a hand over her heart, the flicker of firelight in her eyes. "As you command, living flame. We shall share our faith with open hands, not swords." Daenerys nodded, too drained to debate the nuances of that vow. She moved inside to the painted table room where scribes stood ready to record reports. Tyrion, Missandei, and Yora followed. Grey Worm peeled off to oversee the securing of the fortress gates. With a sigh, Daenerys sank into a chair near the painted table. She traced her fingers over the carved coastlines. "What news from beyond the Stormlands and Crownlands? Have any other lords responded to our letters?" Tyrion retrieved a sheaf of scrolls. "A few. Lord Ricker of the Crownlands pledges fealty if you help him rebuild after recent raids. Lord Tarly in the Reach remains silent, though some rumor he's mustering men, uncertain if you're friend or foe. The North remains quiet. Dorne, well, no official word, but we hear the new leadership in Sunspear is intrigued by your return. Daenerys steepled her fingers, a distant look in her eyes. One step at a time. We'll deal with each region as we can. In the meantime, we must thoroughly crush these Lannister banner outlaws. Post rewards for information leading to their capture. Let every small folk know we'll pay silver for names of bandit leaders. Tyrion nodded. We can do that. Coin is often the best weapon against brigands. Yora crossed his arms, face grim. We should also fortify our positions on the roads. Build watchtowers or outposts so there's a constant presence. The small folk will see that we're serious about keeping them safe. That might inspire more lords to bend the knee without a fight. Daenerys nodded decisively. Yes, let's implement all of that. Let them see that under my rule, roads are safer, bellies are fuller, and justice is swifter. In the days that followed, Daenerys threw herself into the tasks of governance. Messengers and ravens flitted back and forth. Tyrion dispatched envoys to recruit builders, stonemasons, and carpenters willing to erect small fortifications on major roads. Rewards were posted for information on brigand bands. The freedmen councils in Essos sent updates about stable harvests and new trade routes. The Red Temple in Volantis wrote to congratulate Daenerys on her victory of light over the Faith, though she cringed at their exaggeration. She was no victor over the Seven, she had merely struck a truce. Meanwhile, Lord Roland Baratheon arrived at Dragonstone with a small escort, eager to discuss a renewed alliance in person. He spent a few days conferring with Daenerys and Tyrion, coordinating shipments of food and supplies for the Stormlands. He seemed genuinely impressed by the organization she was bringing to the region. Daenerys considered awarding him additional responsibilities, but decided to wait and see if he remained as loyal when tested by adversity. A measure of stability began to take shape in the Crownlands. Reports indicated that many small outlaw bands had fled deeper into the hills or dissolved once they saw the might of the Unsullied posted along the main roads. Some tried to slip into the Reach or the Riverlands, seeking easier targets. Daenerys read these tidings with guarded satisfaction. But not all news was encouraging. One morning, Missandei brought a sealed letter bearing the sigil of House Glover from the north. It was polite but firm. The North considered itself independent, having fought for that right after the wars and the Great Night. They had no quarrel with Daenerys, but they would not bend the knee. Daenerys read it in silence, recalling her old alliances in the North that had frayed and vanished when she departed. Perhaps that bridge could be mended, but not if the North felt threatened. Tyrion studied Daenerys' expression as she folded the letter. We can't force them now, he reminded her. Our hold on the South is still forming. And if we push the North too hard, they'll unite firmly against us. She set the letter aside. I won't wage war on them needlessly. But eventually, the realm should be whole. Perhaps I can persuade them or demonstrate that a united Westeros is better than a fractured one. Tyrion seemed relieved she wasn't considering immediate force. We can send friendly envoys, attempt to reopen dialogue. The North has always been proud, but they might appreciate stable trade routes or aid in rebuilding their roads and ports. Daenerys nodded. Yes. Offer them trade and mutual defense. Perhaps that will open a door. Another letter arrived from the Citadel in Old Town. The Archmasters were curious about how Daenerys intended to govern, whether she planned to impose Red Temple beliefs. They also requested permission to send an observer to Dragonstone to document the unprecedented size of Drogon, though the letter was couched in academic politeness. Daenerys gave permission, hoping that allowing scholars to witness Drogon might quell some wild rumors. Perhaps they would see that, while massive, he was not an agent of mindless destruction. Amid these tasks, Daenerys found fleeting moments to breathe. One bright afternoon, she ventured to the clifftop above the sea, where swirling winds ripped at the tall grass. Drogon perched at the edge, scanning the horizon for whales or sea creatures he might fancy. She approached him, feeling the warmth emanating from his body even in the chill breeze. Gently placing a hand on his massive side, she gazed out at the rolling waters of Blackwater Bay. So much had changed since she first crossed the narrow sea. She had once been a girl with 3 small dragons on her shoulders, dreaming of a throne she'd never seen. Now she stood as the most formidable power in Westeros, yet forced to negotiate, coax, and quell endless pockets of unrest. She was no goddess, but to many, she was a being of mythic potency. Drogon had grown beyond even the old tales. And somewhere in between, Daenerys felt an odd dissonance. Unstoppable to some, yet painfully aware of her own vulnerabilities. She recalled the morning's ambush, the whistle of arrows. One stray shot could have ended her. Drogon was immune to such weapons, but she was not. Yet that did not terrify her as much as the prospect of unleashing Drogon's unstoppable wrath in a moment of rage. She wanted to avoid repeating old mistakes, the ones that had nearly consumed her in the fires of vengeance. She had to govern with care and compassion, to ensure Drogon's flames served only to protect, not to burn innocents. The wind tore at her hair, sending silver strands whipping around her face. She looked to the horizon and thought of the north, the Vale, the Reach, Dorne. Westeros was vast, each region with its own traditions, grudges, alliances. She had begun weaving them together, strand by fragile strand, but one spark of conflict could unravel it all. She pressed her hand against Drogon's flank, as if drawing strength from his living furnace. In the coming weeks, she told herself, she would continue forging alliances, punishing brigands, and supporting the small folk. Gradually, she would show that a united realm under House Targaryen brought peace, not tyranny. The Red Priests might call her divine, but she would prove her worth through deeds that fed the hungry, protected the vulnerable, and upheld justice. If the day came that the entire realm bent the knee willingly, it would be because they saw the realm flourish under her rule, not cower under her flame. She closed her eyes, remembering her vow to break the wheel, not become it. Opening them again, she gazed at the swirling waters far below. "I'll do better," she whispered, voice snatched by the wind. "I'll be better than fire and blood alone." Drogon let out a low rumble, as if in answer. She smiled faintly and turned away, heading back to the fortress where Tyrion and Yora awaited with fresh matters of state. The work was unrelenting, but each new success or alliance was another brick in the foundation of the realm she aimed to build. She would rule not as an untouchable goddess, but as a queen with unbreakable resolve and a dragon whose might would be used sparingly, tempered by the justice she longed to uphold. If the priests insisted she was Azor Ahai, a living flame, so be it. Let them see the truth of her actions, that the brightest fire could also be the most nurturing. If the lords of Westeros bristled at the memory of dragons and Targaryen madness, let them learn that House Targaryen had grown beyond the sins of its past. And if any zealots or bandits challenged her by brandishing old lion sigils or preaching the downfall of the dragon witch, let them face the unstoppable might of Drogon and find out that her mercy had its limits. Far above Dragonstone's basalt walls, the gulls wheeled in the sea breeze. The fortress itself stood as an ancient testament to Targaryen power, once overshadowed by the conquests of old. Now it was the seat of a queen forging a new path. And in its courtyard, and in every corner of the realm that turned its eyes eastward, the whispers grew. Daenerys Stormborn had returned, not just with acclaim, but with a living force of nature at her side. She might be mortal flesh, but her dragon was unstoppable. And if she could balance the sword of fire with the scales of justice, perhaps, at last, Westeros would know the peace it had been denied for so long.